I'm Emily Weiler, and I work for the Montana Public Health Training Center with Alexis Wolf, who is also on. And we are proud to present Tricia Miller today and her webinar. And we are very excited to have you guys. This is our third webinar this spring. And certainly we have a lot more on the docket, so check out our website for upcoming trainings, series, workshops, all sorts of stuff coming up. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Trish. A few house rules. When we get rolling, you can turn your video off, but when you do breakout discussions, please turn it back on. Use the chat box. Me and Alexis will be monitoring it the whole time. So if you have questions, that's usually the easiest, and then I can flag Tricia. You also have the option to raise your hand. There's a button, so you can, yeah, or you can just raise your hand, Katie. And then we can make sure that, you know, we tag you and we can get your question. But otherwise, mute yourself. And we should be good to go. If you have any questions, again, just throw it in the chat. We'll be watching. You can take it away, Tricia.
Okay, let's see. Let's make sure that shared the screen. Did that work?
Yep. Okay, perfect.
So, of course, now most of you are used to doing everything via Zoom, so this should be old hat for all of you. Hopefully this goes nice and smoothly on the double screens, double webcam, all that good jazz. So if I go like this or like this, and I'm not leaving you, I promise. So just a few things before we get started. So I'm excited to be here. I know there's a lot of you, we asked the question as you registered, you know, sort of where you were at in the grant management process. If you were new to this, or if you've been doing this for a long time, and then we got such a wide response. So it was a little more difficult to tailor this to a specific group. So what I've tried to do here is sort of meet in the middle, right? So for some of you today will just be a review, and maybe you can do like a health checkup to see maybe some things that you could make changes to if necessary, or, oh gosh, I could probably do this instead of this. For a lot of you, this might be a little overwhelming if you haven't done anything, because there's a lot of information, right? The good part is that you do have all the materials that you can look at later, and we're going to spend a little bit of time at the very end. There's several things on the reference slide that are really good for future reference. There's a few modules that are actually put together by one of the leading finance management for healthcare professors. He actually passed away in 2016, but I think his book was on the 6th edition when he passed away, and they actually went ahead and completed that text. So, I mean, clearly he's the expert. So there's a lot of information like that, and he has some training modules that are a pretty easy read. And so for some of that information, if you're looking for more than that, there'll be some ways to do other things outside of what we're doing today. We're going to try to break it up a little bit so you don't have to sit here and listen to me talk for hours on end. There's a couple of options that we have that we can do breakout rooms. So that's going to be fun for us to get to do a little hands-on activity. I promised that I wouldn't overburden everybody with math today, and the math that we will do, we will get to cheat and use Excel, and we'll save that till the end. So hopefully it will not burn everybody out in the process. And like Emily and Alexa said, if you have any questions or comments, we can always chat during a break or during your breakout rooms. And also if you need to just send it to them, and we'll get to that when we can. So let's sort of look at where we're going to go today. The introduction, that's where we're at right now. Part one is, what do managers do? I think it's always a good idea to stop and think, like, what are we supposed to be doing in the process of all of these things? In section 2, we're actually going to talk about documentation. It's so important, the documentation, and you know, we can feel like that's busy work, and that's, why do we have to do all this paperwork, all these things? But it's really important for us. So we're going to talk about why that's important and exactly what we should be documenting and how we can do that. And then we're going to get into the meat of today, which is managing project finances. And what do we mean by that? And what are the components of all of those things? So we're actually going to get through parts 1 and 2 relatively quickly, because we want to spend the bulk of the day in part 3. But I just want to get us going, and so we can sort of come into that when we get to the managing the finances, why do these other things matter before we get to that kind of point. So we have some learning objectives. Of course, we'll have the conclusion. I always forget the conclusion. So learning objectives for today, at the end of the webinar, we should be able to do several things, right? The first, we want to identify the 3 overarching categories of resources that managers allocate. Okay, so if we start to compartmentalize these things, we can make sure that we actually are including all the things that we need to include, and hopefully we're not missing something that's going to cause us an issue later. We're also going to identify the 5 reasons for documentation. As I just mentioned, documentation is really important, so we want to discuss at least 5 reasons why we would want to do so, and hopefully we can realize how important that documentation is. And then we want to talk about the 3 different categories to document. And we've got a bunch of handouts for you. So some of the stuff will be on the slides, but there's a lot of handouts that go with this for you to look back through later on and sort of see where you're at and do, like I said, a health checkup. We want to define the differences between what an in-kind contribution is, a direct cost, and an indirect cost. These can be kind of tricky, and they get people a little flustered sometimes. So we want to make sure everybody's on the page for what are we classifying when we talk about in-kind contributions, direct costs, and indirect costs. And finally, we want to, or actually, one more thing after that, we want to identify the 5 components of a total project budget versus the grant proposal and the grant budget. So those are not the same things. So we want to highlight what actually goes in the total project budget versus what we're actually talking about as far as the grant money goes. Again, if you think they're the same thing, you're probably going to be in trouble sometime as far as budgeting goes. So we want to make sure that, and not all of you will have all those 5 components, but here's the things that would make that up. So we want to be sure everybody's clear on that. And finally, here's where we get to do some math. This is where we get to learn how to calculate a simple variance analysis, which I think will be very useful, even if you have no budget background. I know most of you probably, are not in this grant management because you went to school to do that, right? A lot of you care about the things that you care about in public health, and you have made your way into a situation where you're managing a grant, which is great. But it also means that most of us are not overly skilled in this. This is not our bread and butter per se, but it becomes our bread and butter because if we don't manage the grant well, we're in trouble for our program or project. So hopefully these little short tools will at least get us something to be able to do a health check on your actual budget throughout the year so that you don't get to the end of the year and have a major issue. So those are the things we hope to learn today. So let's go ahead then and get started. We're going to get, like I said, we're going to start with part 1, and that's going to be just our basic, what do managers do? What do managers do? What does it even mean to manage, right? Some of you say that. It's funny, I know when I first talk about this with my students, leadership and management, a lot of times people have those like they're synonymous, right? And the reality is they're not. And so as we went through it, I know that I have several students who have thought about it and said, gosh, I'm a really good manager, but I'm not a very good leader, or I'm a really good leader, but I'm not a very good manager. And for most of you, you're probably trying to do both. And so that makes it even more difficult when you try to tease those things out of what are we talking about when we do those kind of things. So first, the definition of management. Management means to allocate resources to accomplish things, okay? So allocating resources to accomplish things, pretty basic definition, right? But a big, huge chunk of what we're going to talk about today is actually allocating resources. What do managers actually do to allocate resources? And of course, we're accomplishing things. That's the whole goal of our project or program. So we want to just think about that a little bit, about management. So we're allocating resources. So if we're talking about leadership, right? Leadership is more of a vision thing, right? If you're looking at that overarching, where are we going to go? Where are we going to end up in 5 years? We want to, fix the homeless situation in our communities. We want to make sure we're providing all these things that we need to do. That's that vision. And so a leader is able to do that. They provide vision and direction. But on the other hand, a manager is somebody who's overseeing those day-to-day tasks, right? You're checking to see if things are performed on time, if they're done correctly, if adjustments need to be made, because really we're thinking about like this. We need to put one foot in front of the other, right? A manager has to keep us on track, right? And so like a really good example of this is sort of a political one. Ronald Reagan was a huge leader. He was a visionary, right? He was like, dream big, let's have a defense program. We're gonna have Star Wars. How do we get there? No answer, okay? That just wasn't the thing. On the other hand, George H.W. Bush, who was his vice president and then became president, he used to always say, I don't get that vision thing. He just wasn't a leader in that way, right? He was really great with management, but he wasn't a very good leader. So of course, they made a nice little pair when they were president and vice president. It didn't work out so great when H.W. went to be in that leadership role because he was used to being much more of a manager. So we really just want to think about those and the differences between those. And as I mentioned, I realize that so many of you are working understaffed, underpaid, overworked, right? So you're probably playing both roles. I mean, that's more than likely that's the key. But what you need to do is when you're doing the management side, think about that. Are you working too far ahead? Do you need to sort of back up a little bit and think about what your job is today? What are you keeping track of this month? How are we going to get to that big picture at some point and doing the baby steps? So we just need to recognize that kind of stuff, because when you're allocating resources, even though you have to look in the big picture, like for a budget in a year's time, right, you're still going to have to figure out how to do that on a day-to-day basis and not have a problem when you get to the end. Okay. All right, so roles and responsibilities of managers. Of course, managers allocate resources. That's the big thing. Managers also have to have skills, and they also have to have responsibility and authority to do their job. Now, we're going to spend most of our time today talking about allocating resources. And for a lot of you, clearly you know that you need that responsibility and authority to do your job. But that also applies to the staff that you might have that are working for you. Are you giving them, are you assigning responsibility enough for them to know what their job actually is so that you can check to make sure they're doing it? And are you giving them the authority to carry that out? Do you have a set of responsibilities that you have to answer for, and do you have the authority to carry those out? If not, you know, that's a conversation you can have with others in the organization, that you can make sure you're actually able to do the things that you're supposed to be doing. And of course, we all know that managers need skills because they have to be able to manage these resources and allocate time and check for things. And so a lot of us don't have the necessary skills. We didn't come in, like I said, we're not trained for this. But the beauty of skills is that they can be learned, right? So the whole goal, that's why most of you, I assume, are here today, is to pick up some of those skills, right? And you know, there's always another training or something that you can go if you're missing pieces. And we're so lucky that we have the internet as a resource to be able to pull off a bunch of different things. So, you know, if you're having problems with one issue, you can probably Google really quickly and find some information that will help you get those skills. So like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on those two pieces today, just a reminder that we have to have those as well. The big one for us is really that the managers have to allocate resources. So if our main goal is to talk about allocating resources, what are the resources that a manager allocates, right? Because resources, well, what is that? Well, there's three overarching resources that managers allocate, and those are time, money, and things. Time, money, and things. Now, you guys have a handout actually called resource allocation. I think. Oops. That looks like this. And if we look at that, notice there are several pieces. So time, money, and things are the overarching pieces of this resource allocation. But if you notice, there are several different pieces here in each one of these. And so, you know, it's probably a good idea for you after we finish to stop and think about which of these things are you managing, right? Is there more that you need to include? You'll notice from most of our handouts today that they're really basic, right? This is just let's do a check. You may need to mark some things off. You might need to add some things to this, right? But the whole goal here is just to get you thinking about, okay, and then when you look at these resources of time, money, and things, where are you spending the most amount of your time as a manager, right? Is there a way, do you need to be spending more time on one of these areas than another? You know, are the volunteers taking up too much of your time? Do you need to give that responsibility to someone else? Do you need to create a volunteer leader to be able to do those kind of things, right? Where are you spending the majority of your management time on managing these time, money, and things? So again, I think it's just a good idea for us to think about that, how much of our day, and I think we all just get so busy, we show up and we do what we have to do right this minute, and we don't really think about how much of that is eating up our management time. And are we doing that in the best and most efficient and effective way we possibly can? So hopefully that will be helpful to you later. Time, money, and things. That's the three resources that managers allocate. And a really good way for us to look at this is to talk about organizational charts, right? Everybody's favorite, the org chart. Okay, now, the reason I bring that up is this. For most of you, if you're working on a project or program, and basically I'm going to use those words as the same thing today. Sometimes I'll say both, sometimes I'll say one or the other, but I know most of you are, if you're managing a grant, it's probably for a program or for a specific project, right? So we got a little bit of both of those things. But a lot of you are actually then under the umbrella of an organization to manage that program or project, right? Maybe you're a piece of a health department, so you're part of the overall organization. So when we think about that, we know that most of those have an organizational chart. As a matter of fact, I have one here. This is from the Missoula Health Department. And I think I have one, another one also in your packet. that actually is the organizational chart for DPHHS. But it's actually not for the whole organization. I think that one's just for family and child care services. And the reason I picked that is because I wanted us to see that if you look at the health department as a whole, notice there's several components. Well, maybe you're over here in the DUI task force, right? So you're thinking, well, I'm part of this organizational chart, but do you have one actually for your DUI task force, right? So that's a really good way for you to put that into perspective, to see not only what your responsibilities are, but what anybody else who's working with you and where do they fit in that chart. And it's easier for us to then assign those responsibilities and keep track as the manager of who's doing what job. So, you know, and I always have people say, well, these look so fancy. What do you do? How do you do that? So just really quickly, here's a blank one, right? This is just a smart art, okay? So you can download a template. There's lots of them out there that work for you, but you actually don't have to spend forever making these boxes. If you just go to insert either on Word or in PowerPoint and hit Smart Art, it gives you several different options depending on what your organization actually looks like. And then these text boxes, you actually are allowed to type in just the names that you need. So it can be relatively basic. You just need something to make sure that everybody understands where they're at in this hierarchy and who's going to be responsible to whom as you work through your program or project. All right, so see, we already railed through part one. That's good, we're good. So what is it that managers do? First of all, the biggest thing that I think that you'll see in any textbook that you read about grant management is to do what you say you're gonna do. Seems simple enough, right? But if you really wanna check on what you're doing, right, especially if you're managing grants, you need to think about, what did you say you were going to do? What are the goals? What is your budget? What did you say you were going to do, and are you doing it? So if you do what you said you would do, you're going to be okay, right? Now, how it is that you do that, right? You managers allocate resources. Again, it's time, money, or what? Things, time, money, and things. And we can use an organizational chart, right? Because that's a useful resource and it can help keep everybody responsible for what they're supposed to be doing. But again, I can't stress enough that your job as a manager is to do what you said you would do, okay? I mean, that's what's gonna happen. The grantor is gonna be holding you to whatever it was that you said you were doing. So you wanna make sure that when you're applying for the grant, that you're very specific and very clear about what it is that you are going to do so that you actually can do that. Some of you have just been given grants that you're now trying to manage. So it'd be a really good idea to go back to that grant, that award letter, and look in the budget narrative, look at the budget you've been given, and see what it was that whoever made the grant, whoever wrote the grant, what did they say that would be done, and make sure that you're doing that. Because I think that's a really big piece of it, and that's what the grantor is going to hold you to. So again, the goal here today is to do what you said you would do. All right, so let's talk about documentation. So how do we do what we said we would do, right? Well, we document. That's what we do, right? Paper, 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 paper. Okay. So here's why. And there's 5 of these. So, and we'll go through this quickly and then we'll talk about each one separately. So we want to manage the project effectively. We document so that we can evaluate, right? We also document so that we can disseminate the information to the community and to stakeholders, to people who care about the program, to our own organization. We also document so that we can provide guidance for replication. Clearly, things cannot be replicated if there's not a paper trail to go with that. And finally, of course, most importantly for all of you, for continuation, right? Most of you know that your grant is going to run out at some point and you're either going to have to reapply for that particular grant or you're going to have to find a way to continue on your own. So clearly, these 5 reasons are very important to what it is that you're doing. And so how do we actually go about doing that? So manage the project effectively. If management of the project is to allocate resources to accomplish these activities, then we need to know, what are those resources, right? What are the activities, and what order, at what time, and what is needed to do them? So we're never going to remember all these things, right? When you first start something, oh, I remember what we did last Thursday, and it was at 2 o'clock, and we had 5 people here, and it was great. Well, now we're 6 months into the project, and somebody asks you, what happened at that meeting? And you can't remember, right? Because none of us has that kind of memory, even if we're really good at this. And for most of us, we're juggling so many things, it's much more difficult for us to remember all those. So the biggest reason for us is managing effectively is to have everything at our disposal. We don't want to waste time and energy looking or trying to remember. So we want all that stuff at our disposal. so that we can easily get to it, right? So if somebody comes and asks a question, we can pull out the documentation and say, yes, this is what it was. We did this. Do we need to make a change to it? Well, I don't know. What did we do last time, right? So really the best thing for us to do is to document absolutely everything we possibly can. And that's going to help us to manage a project more effectively. The second reason is because evaluation is coming, right? Whether you're having a full formal evaluation or whether you're just turning in an evaluation report to the grantor at the end, they want to know about how you spent the money, and they need you to be specific, right? And you cannot complete an evaluation of any sort if you don't have the data. And to be able to have the data, you have to document, right? They want to know specifically what you've done. They want to know that you did 25 community training sessions, and there was a total of attendance of 8.5 adults at every one, and that was 36% of the population that you were trying to reach, okay? So they want to know that. They don't want to say, oh yeah, we did a good job. The community is really supportive of this. What do you mean by that, right? What do you mean? You mean you had 25 trainings and 8.5 people came on an average to each one, right? So if you document, you can only make that statement if you actually have done that documentation and you have those exact numbers and the tallies, right? So you just can't do an evaluation without it. And I see this so often in evaluations. People get to a point where they want to do an evaluation and I say, okay, well, what are your evaluation questions? And they come up with these great questions. This is what we want to check. We want to make sure we're doing this and this and this. And I say, okay, for that, you will need this kind of data or this kind of, and they'll say, oh, we weren't collecting it. We haven't been documenting that. Well, you can't answer that question if you don't have the documentation, right? So it's a really big deal for us to make sure. So you always should be looking forward to say, what are the questions that they're going to ask me about this project, right? What was the goals? And of course, you can use tools like causal loops and logic models to help show you where you're going and then make sure that you're actually documenting in the process of those kind of things. So the next thing is that we want to document to disseminate, right? What are you going to tell people? It's going to be your responsibility to get the word out, okay? So the grantor probably is going to have something to say about how they want to be identified with this project or program, and whether or not they want to say they are the grantor in this case, and if that's the responsibility and whatnot. But after that, it's really going to be up to you to get this information out, right? And of course, you're going to want to get the information out. What is this program about? What is this project doing? What do we expect out of it? And is it working? So there's going to be several times that you actually have to give out information. And again, you can't do that. You can't talk to the community about what your successes are or where you might need help later. If you want people to think that the community feels great about the project, you're probably going to have to do some interviews or some surveys. You're going to have to work with these people to see if they actually are really motivated about this or if it's just a thought, right? So you're going to have evidence for that. So documentation, definitely fundamental to dissemination. So next, we want to talk about documenting for replication. So a lot of grants are funded for a first-time project to try something, to see if it will work, like as a demonstration, maybe as a pilot program. And so at the heart of this is that the hope is always that we could use it, right? We want policies and programs and projects to be useful and used. And if we aren't really focusing on that, we aren't documenting to be able to replicate this, how is anybody be able to use that, right? It's your job to make sure that when you are providing this documentation that you understand there's a really good chance if it's working for you that maybe it will work someplace else in another community. Now there's two pieces to this. One, you want to make sure that you've documented well enough that they actually can replicate, right? I mean, some of you have maybe looked at other model programs and maybe they have perfect documentation, you understand exactly what they did, and other times you might have looked at this and thought, well, what happens here in the middle? There's no information about that. So clearly that's going to make it hard to replicate a program if you don't have that information. And the second thing is, some communities are not necessarily exactly the same. So the more information that you can document, they might be able to identify that, oh, maybe our demographics are off just a little bit. And so we need to not do this part or to do this part differently. But because you have actually done a good job documenting, they will know where they need to make adjustments to use your base model, but to maybe make some changes. So if you're looking at trying to replicate from someplace else, make sure that they actually have enough documentation. And when you're doing your program or project, make sure you're including as much as you possibly can, because there's a really good chance. Again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? If there are programs and projects that are out there that are working, we want to grab a hold of those and use what we can from that. And so I think it's really important for all of us, right? Public health is so broad, right? And we have from all the way at the federal level to the states, to the local level, and we're seeing such a disjuncture, right, between the levels. We can look to the current situation to be able to see that. But I think for a lot of us, we don't realize, there's each level has its own responsibility and they have their own ways of doing things. And so again, people sometimes get stuck on the let's start from scratch. And really there's a lot of things that are actually out there and are available for us to look at. And replication is really important for us to be able to do that, because all of us want to move forward and most of us are strapped for time, money, and things, right? So what we want to do is make the most of what we do have. And by replicating, we're able to actually do that. And the big one, of course, right? Continuation. So grantors make grants for lots of reasons, right? But if they've given you a grant to solve a problem, they're going to expect that solution will continue after the grant is over, right? They're not going to want you to solve the problem for the 6 months you have the grant or the 1 year you have the grant, and then all of a sudden the grant ends and that problem is back because there's no way to keep that moving, right? So sometimes we call this continuation, sometimes it's sustainability. It might actually become institutionalization if you can find a way to promote that into your organization that you already have. But really one important aspect of continuation is convincing other people to support that project, right? Again, you might be able to reapply for that same grant. You're going to have to make your case for why you should continue. Sometimes you're going to have to look to stakeholders or people outside in the community or to your board of directors or city and county governments, maybe the state health department or the federal government. And when you approach these groups with your request, you can't just give your heartfelt plea and say, please don't take this away, right? They want cold hard facts. And most of you know this, right? That data will get you a long way. I mean, let's think about it this way. If you can show that an investment of $10,000 in the project that you're doing will prevent $200,000 in future medical expenses, you're probably going to get some help with some funding for that, right? But you have to have that number, that data, that documentation. What have you done and what do you see are the results for that? And again, that's our huge goal, right? Here is for continuation. We want whatever it is we're working on to be able to keep moving forward. It's very disheartening when we have to lose a program or project because the funding ran out, right? And so we really want to make sure that we use the best of our ability to get that documentation. And the more you can document, the better it's going to be for everybody. Okay, so now we know why we need to document, right? We have 5 reasons to document. So again, we want to document to be effective as managers, right? We want to document because we know that we're going to need to disseminate results. We want to document because we know we're going to need continuation. We know we're going to need evaluation, right? We know we have all these pieces for why we need to document. So that's the why. Okay, so if we know why, we want to know who documents, right? And so again, you have a documentation, you have this who documents in your packet, but here's just, I mean, if we think about this, if we look at all these different places that could document, right? That's a lot. It's basically everyone. It's pretty much everybody who works in the project or program. This is not just you as a manager that's doing all the documentation. Of course, it's your job, again, to manage those things and make sure people are documenting what they should. But if we've assigned responsibility to someone, then we also need to make sure that they understand it's their job to document, right? That they need to understand the importance of documentation, because otherwise you're going to be stuck in that component when you go to ask them and they're not going to have it for you, right? So part of your thing is, you know, it'd be a good idea for those of you who are doing it, if there's other people working on your project or program, to think, okay, wait, am I asking them to document? Have I been clear about what I need from them at the end? Because we can't hold them responsible later if we haven't been clear in our expectations. So we have to think about that. Everybody documents. Excuse me. All right, so of course you could modify any of these things. Maybe you all don't have this. Some of you are laughing thinking, well, I don't have a financial office personnel, right? We have no project staff. We don't have volunteers or partners, right? So some of you will have to tweak some of this as you go through, but it's just a good, like I said, who do you have? Who's working with you and for you? Who's in your organization? Are you asking them to do the right part of documentation, right? Okay, so there's 3 different things that we're going to talk about as far as documentation during the grant process itself. Okay, so if we're going to talk, we need to do this, what are the things we're documenting? First of all, financial transactions, right? Of course, we all know this. That's that whole keep track of the money and how are we spending things. And we're going to spend all of our time in the third part talking about the financial transactions and how do we document. The other thing is events or encounters. And the last one, of course, is processes or components. Okay, so that seems basic and generic, so we'll talk a little bit about what each one of those are. Excuse me, my goodness. It's allergy season here in Southern California. For those of you, I guess I didn't mention that when I started. I'm coming to you live today from Southern California. an hour behind you, so I started nice and early. So there we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what each of these things are. So financial transactions. This seems relatively simple on the face of it, right? Because those category of financial transactions, this includes more than just cash, right? There's several different types of things that we consider as financial transactions. Cash is one of them. In-kind contributions.
This is
and project activities. Of course, salaries. Oops. All right, so if this is our list of things, right, we can think about it this way. You maybe have just cash transactions that take place when you spend the grant. Now, cash is hard because you've got to make sure you've got receipts and you've covered that. So typically we want to at least see that we're writing checks of some sort, which again, we'll mention later. There's in-kind contributions to the budget of the project by your organization. There are volunteers, there are partners. Maybe the organization as a whole is going to give you some cash for the project activities. Maybe you're going to generate some revenue with whatever it is you're doing for your program or project. And all of these financial transactions have to be documented. And again, in part 3, we're going to discuss how to actually break these things down so we know we're keeping really good track. But it's critical that you find out up front from the grantor, what are the requirements, right? You need to set up your system to comply with them. So they're going to have specific things that they want you to track and how you track them. So I'll give an example, and I'm going to use this several times today. So I am the treasurer for my son's high school basketball booster board, okay? Because I drew the short straw and nobody else wanted to do it. And you have to have a treasurer or you can't have a booster board. That's just the rules. So it's my job to keep track of the finances. Now I do that in a way that works for me, right? But at the end of the year, I have to turn that in to our overall parent booster organization. And they are very specific about what I have to turn into them and how to do it. So I have to check with them, right, to make sure that what I'm keeping track of will at least give me, I've documented everything in my way to be able to answer their questions at the end, right? And so if I'm not doing that, then I can't answer what they need me to answer when I get to that point. So it's really important for us. And again, I do it totally different than they do. I actually keep more information, and then that makes it easier for me. They want me to actually combine it. So it takes me quite a while at the end of the year to take those categories that seem very strange to me. And the reason it's like that is because every booster board is different, right? Because there are cheerleading and there is basketball and there's dance. Well, all of those things some of them create revenue and some of them don't, right? Some of them are just getting money. So what the overall board has tried to do is create a document that will be useful, that could be used by everybody. The problem is most of us don't keep track of things in that way because that's the way our booster board runs. And so I have to spend a lot of time. But again, the important part of that is that I need to know what they're going to ask me at the end, right? So you need to think about this. How is it that you're going to comply with those systems to be able to answer the financial transaction question? So next we have occurrences and events. These are things that don't take place very often, right? Maybe once or twice throughout the course of your program or project, only a relatively short period of time. Might be things like a gala or an open house, a trip to DC, okay? So these are occurrences and events, the big thing that you do, to get something off the ground or to promote what you've been doing for the last 6 months. This is the documentation that we need to keep track of for that. And when we do these things, we need to make sure that we don't just say we had an open house on Friday from 5:30 to 8:30, right? We want as much information as possible. If we've created a brochure, if we have a flyer, a pamphlet, if people are coming to this, do we take down their information to find out who was there? We don't want to just know who said they might come, who actually showed up, who was really there for that kind of thing. So occurrences and events, that's a big one. We can go back and look to see. We haven't done it very often during the time, but it can give us some really useful information, especially when we're talking about getting money to continue our grants or to continue our program or project. We want to know the people who are actually involved, who shows up, who comes, who's helpful. And again, if we don't take down their information, we don't have any idea. And then it makes it really difficult, and we're spinning our wheels trying to figure out who came, who's involved, who actually means it, right? A lot of people in the community will say, oh, that's a great program, that's a great project. But when it comes to actually being involved with it, they're AWOL, right? So this is a way for us to document. And if we know that, then those are the people we can contact first, right? And hopefully then we can get them to help us get some other resources in the process of that. And finally, this piece, processes and components, okay? Processes and components are just the words that we use to talk about the project activities that take place probably through the duration of the project. These are the things that we think about all the time: mentoring, professional development, counseling, training participants, even documentation itself falls into this category, right? So in your handouts, you actually have a list of various financial transactions, occurrences, and components that have to be documented. And it's called Examples of What to Document. I think it looks like this. That's a lot. There's a lot of things right there, right? So this is the whole thing. This is financial transactions, occurrences, and components. Notice it looks like a jumbled mess. I did that on purpose, okay? I did that on purpose because I know when you start to think about all those things, there's a lot of them, right? And for some of you, you won't have all of them. But for most of it, you will look through here pretty quickly and see that you may have a lot of things that you actually need to be documenting, right? So here's the what. So again, hopefully you can pull this out and go, okay, I don't have to do any of those things. Oh, I probably need to document this, right? I don't know if we did that very well last time. And this is the best part, right? You know, nothing that we talk about in the training today is meant to say, oh, you're not doing that. You know, it's the whole point is for us to say, hey, I can make this change and it would be better, right? Because we're always looking to be better, and lifelong learning is a very good thing. So that's what we're doing on that. So now we've talked about why and we've talked about what. Let's talk about how. How do we document? Well, you're thinking, well, that's not hard. We just write stuff down, right? But for a lot of us, a lot of the events and encounters, those processes and components, and even the financial transactions, they automatically generate documents, right? So if you have payroll records or canceled checks, test results, publicity materials, training materials, questionnaires, all of those things, you've naturally created your own document. All you have to do is make sure you save it, right? I mean, have you ever get sent out a questionnaire and somehow or another you lost the questionnaire along the way, right? Most of us have, thank goodness, cloud and that kind of thing. So it's a lot simpler for us to be able to keep up with that kind of process today. But it wasn't always that way, right? You know, if you misplace that questionnaire, who has it? Who remembers? Who made it? Who created it? And again, so you're going to want to keep a copy of all of those things that you're using and all those things that are being documented. And when you go to your people who are working with you, when you ask them monthly or quarterly for their documents, make sure that there's a copy of those things that you are keeping for yourself, right? Because, you know, we all know we have turnover, right? And so when that happens, we may lose whatever was documented from that particular person, or we don't know how or what they were documenting in the process. So if we can always collect that on a regular basis, and I think that's a big thing for us as managers, is don't wait till the end of the year, right? We want to make sure that we're doing these things on a regular basis. Are we checking in with our people and getting those documents and making the copies that we need to, so we can keep that file together? So a lot of times, like I said, all you have to do is gather the stuff. But sometimes, right, we actually have to create documents, right? So how do we do that? Well, you just have to think, what is the important concepts that we're actually doing, right? What are the creation of documents? How do we actually do this? Do we have to come up with this out of thin air? Maybe. Are there guidelines? Probably, right? Again, this is a really good way for you to just Google and go. Of course, there's always guidelines, and you can figure that out, that what goes into that. But think about this. Documents are any written or recorded material that provide a record of evidence about something that happened or the state that something is in. Okay, again, that's any written or recorded material. So sometimes we have to think outside the box. Maybe we need a video. Maybe we need to record part of the gala so that we can see, how did we set up the tables and how many people did we put there, and was it overcrowded? Did we do all those things? I mean, all that goes into the management of it. So it's not necessarily just writing, right? Maybe we need to take pictures. A lot of times, like I said, we need to think outside the box to make sure we're getting the best, what is the best way to document what we're talking about, right? So we just want to be able to provide that record or evidence about something that happened or the state that it was in. If we think about all the different things that we would know if we observed an occurrence, we can list the items. So what do we care about? So when you're creating your own document, right, part of the thing you need to do is think about, okay, what is important for us? And we want to be effective when we're doing that. We want to create a powerful, effective document, or again, video, pictures, things of that nature. But by effective, we mean something that preserves the essence of what happened. Did you capture that? Did you capture what happened at that time period, at that meeting, right? You know, you've seen meeting notes that, you know, you could not tell at all what happened in that meeting, right? And some meeting notes are 17 pages long and nobody ever reads them. But the reality is, if you need to look back, it's actually there. Think about it. In the long run, if you ever go back to meeting notes, if they've done a really good job, that's useful to you, right? If it's just one little line on a bullet point, you have zero idea about what happened or what was covered. And if you've missed that meeting, you're at a loss, right? So there's a couple examples in your handout packets, and one is called the event documentation form, and the other is a people information form. So we're looking at it that way. Let me see. Event documentation form. Okay, so here it is. What was the reason for event? Where was it held? Who sponsored it? Who helped? How was it carried out? And the participants. Here's the information. Who was there, right? Specifically, how do we get a hold of them again? So when we need them to show back up, right, that we have that contact. Activities, what happened, right? And what were the outcomes? And again, all of these things can be tweaked. These are just simple Word documents, and I purposely left them like that. Most of these are taken from this book called Grant Winner's Toolkit, Project Management and Evaluation. It's an older text, but it's really user-friendly. It came actually originally, it has these documents within the text, but it came actually like on a floppy disk. So you can't get those anymore. So what I did was I replicated as much of that as I could for you, but I did leave them in Word documents purposely. So you can just copy paste. Hopefully you can just make these be useful for whatever you actually have to do. And the other one is the people information form, which looks like this. So who are they? Where do they live? How do we reach them? Do we need to know this ethnicity stuff? Does it matter what their gender is, right? Where is their employment? And what is their relationship to the project, right? Are they working for us? So this is a good thing to do even for everybody you have. Do you have people information, right, on every bit of people that have anything to do with your project or program, right? Because if you don't, again, you're going to be at a loss at some point. And that's just more time that you're going to have to go looking through things. We don't want to say, well, how do we get a hold of so-and-so at the city commissioner, right? Well, if we have it here, if we've documented that. So even if you take time and give a responsibility, even if you haven't done an event or an open house, if you know of people that might be useful to what your overall goal is, go ahead and have people fill this stuff out so you've got that documentation later. So if you need to pull it, you're not wasting time, you know. And we always have new people. We hope that we're adding to that as we move through it. But realistically, we want the more we can actually have a little file that says, here's all the people that might be helpful. That would be really great for us. All right, so let's jump back over here. Like I said, the event documentation form and the people information form, that's what we just looked at. So we've already gone through part 2. So here's a little recap, right? So what do we talk about? Documentation, super important, right? What are those 5 reasons to document? So to manage a project effectively, don't you love it when you're in a Zoom meeting and you're thinking, does she actually mean answer me? Right? So I was going to make Alexis and Emily do it, but we'll go with that. So they're not paying any attention at all, I can tell you right now. I'm just teasing, they are. But we want to manage the project effectively, right? We want to be able to, for evaluation, we want to do it for replication and for continuation, right? And so when we're looking at those pieces of it, that's the important part of why. What are the reasons we document? And what are the 3 categories of things that we document? Time, money, things, right? Time, money, and things. Okay, so those are our 3 categories of that. And who's going to document? Everybody. What are we documenting? Absolutely everything we possibly can, right? So knowing what to collect and how to do that is the most important piece of that. All right, so since we got through both of those 2 relatively quickly, let's take a short 5 minutes and get some more coffee for those of you who need it. Since Emily doesn't have her brother to bring her some, we'll give her a minute to go grab some coffee. And we will come back in about 5 minutes. Let's just do a short break. Give us just a couple minutes here to make sure we're on track. Okay. Grant should have already been paying for, right? So we have to think about it that way. You're supplementing with most grant. If you're talking about staff, you need to supplement. Now, again, if you're starting from scratch, you just put in, here's the people we're going to need. You don't have a problem with supplanting because you didn't have anybody to begin with, right? But make sure if you're going to add people to your staff that you're not taking one person out to let them go do something else and replacing them in that kind of capacity. Okay. All right, let's talk about travel. Travel means getting from one place to another, which none of us do anymore, right? So we don't have to worry about this. We can all just forget about that, right? But hopefully that someday, of course, in Montana, you guys can leave. I haven't left the house in months, except to go to the grocery store. So you have all that fresh air, warm weather. It's like 900 degrees here, and we can't leave. So feel bad for me. It's the most fun I have all day is pretending to breathe your Montana air, okay? All right, so travel, of course, getting from one place to another, and this includes eating and lodging. Don't forget, though, the tipping and parking and tolls. Like, so some of you are going to say, well, I'm beholden, we only have reimbursement rates for whatever. Yes, that's true. For a lot of you, that's going to be the case. right? But if you're working on a grant, if you're working on asking for additional grant funding, again, that you may not be beholden to that kind of thing. So you have to think about it. You have to ask and look and see. So the kinds of costs that can really be incurred during travel are numerous, but we can still list them. Travel is relatively easy as a direct cost to keep, right? Because travel is typically through the ground or the air. Usually they don't include trips on boats, but of course that would be a caveat there if you were doing like marine research. But typically when we talk about travel, we're talking about ground or air. If we're going to travel by air, of course we know it's just the price is whatever the cost of the ticket is, and that's not too difficult. But ground can be a little bit more difficult because are they getting a rental car? Are they driving themselves? Is it a limo? Do they come by subway or bus? What is it? How are they getting from place to place? And why are we covering the cost of that? And again, some of you are beholden to whatever the rate is, especially when it comes to costs of meals and lodging. We all know that doesn't actually cover the costs of meals and lodging, right? So we need to make sure that it's okay that the person that we're going to have to do the travel with is okay with making that in-kind contribution. Think about that. If you're going to go spend, you go to lunch, right? If somebody in your organization goes to lunch, and it's $20, right? And you can only reimburse them 10 because, or 15, whatever you're beholden for the day, right? They're technically giving you the in-kind contribution of $5, right? So you need to make sure that people understand that they can only be reimbursed. And most of you are used to working with this, and let them know ahead of time, because you may not be able to take just their receipts, right, for that. So same thing with lodging. It's easy to know how much it eats and lodges, right? But if you're going to have something come up and you are asking for grant funds, make sure you can see if you can include the tipping and parking and tolls, because you're asking a lot of people if they have to pay those components, right? Think about how much that adds up in the course of a couple of days travel, okay? Okay, excuse me. So again, we said some of you are set by mileage reimbursement or meal reimbursement, so you don't really have a choice here on this travel. You just have to go with it. Let's talk about stipends. Stipends, you're like, oh, that's when you get paid. No, we already talked about when we get paid. That's personnel, right? So what is all this stipend stuff, right? So this stands by itself so we don't get misunderstandings, right? And remember when I said there were 9 categories and people tend to collapse some of them? This is one of those things. They put in, wages and stipends, and they like, what's the difference? Well, it's funny because if we actually looked up the dictionary definition of a stipend, it says a regular or fixed payment for services, any periodic payment as a pension or allowance, and then it goes on to say the synonym is wage. And I just got done telling you it's not. So somebody needs to call up Webster's and tell them they got that wrong, okay? But here's why. This is what a stipend actually does. We think about a stipend in this way as it comes for this grant-funded project, right? So typically we think about stipends having to have 2 things, okay? And here they are on the slide. One is that they're probably associated with a training of some sort, and they have a pre-established level. Okay, so this is not your normal wage, right? A stipend is not something that we give somebody on a regular basis. That is a wage. We pay the people a wage. We also include the fringe. We take out all the taxes, okay? A stipend is something above and beyond that, made to an individual under a fellowship or training grant in accordance with pre-established levels. And here's what we mean by that, right? So think about this. Usually a stipend is considered a nice little bribe, right? Hey, we want you to come to this training on Saturday. We feel really bad, so we're gonna give you a $100 stipend, okay? And you're like, oh, sweet, $100, all right? But that's a stipend because it's associated with the training. You probably gave up some time, but it's got a pre-established level. So it doesn't matter, what your actual salary is through the week, right? It may be like all 6 of you that work in that department. You may all make a little bit different. Your friends might be different, how long you've been there. Stipends are not calculated based on what you already make as wages, right? A stipend says, hey, everybody who shows up to this training gets $100, okay? So it's really just this incentive for, sorry we did this to you. Hope this money makes it feel better, okay? I mean, like that's sort of the goal. It's like a peace offering in that way. So stipends are very different from wages. And again, they're preset and they're typically used for training. So if you're gonna use a stipend, that's what it's for, okay? All right, so, well, if a stipend is different, that should be clearly the same thing as an honorarium. No, right? Honorarium is this instant, little interesting payment that we just see every now and then, right? Well, relatively rare do we give an actual honorarium, okay? But this is not to be confused with a stipend because it's not. Okay, a stipend is used for training and it has a pre-established level, okay? That's a stipend. But honorariums are typically made for somebody's speech or presentation or performance. Again, if we look at the root word of honorarium, it actually means honor, right? So the basic concept of this kind of payment is to say thank you for showing your expertise, right? So the actual definition is a payment to a professional person for services on which no fee is set or legally obtainable. So there's no contract here, okay? There's nothing, you're not hiring somebody from outside, all right? You are giving them something to honor their presence for doing something for you, for your project, for your program, but you're not beholden to them to do so. There's not a pre-established limit. Now, typically, you're going to talk to the person that's coming and let them know that here's what we give an honorarium. Sometimes you'll find that they don't tell you, right? I've had a few speaking engagements where they've treated it basically like a stipend, where they've told me ahead of time, even though we didn't have a contract, right? But other times you just show up and they say, well, we'll give an honorarium when we're finished. Okay. Is that good, bad, or otherwise? You don't really know, right? So we think about it like this. So let's say we're back to one of those occurrences and events. We're having an open house, we're having a gala, and we have found the leading expert is Oprah on that topic, and we have called her and said, Oprah, can you come to the gala? And she says yes, okay? So she's gonna show up and she's gonna be there and she's gonna bring everybody here. The day comes, she shows up, she talks to you. Are you gonna be able to pay Oprah for her time? No, right? You can't. Nobody can afford to have Oprah, right? So what we said to her instead is that we're going to have an honorarium. Same thing with Bill Gates, right? We could do the same kind of thing. What are we doing? They've shown up to help us out, to lead credence to this. And so we're honoring them with their presence by offering them an honorarium. We give them that contribution. There's no contract. We don't owe her anything for coming. This is just to honor her contribution to the field, the status she lends to the occasion for her kindness, okay? And again, you'll see people using stipend and honorarium the same. Clearly they are not. Clearly they are not. One is for training, pre-set limits. One is to say, thank you, awesomeness, for coming, okay? So be careful that we're not considering using those two words as the same thing. All right, services and consultants. So many things that we could hire as services or consultants that could be direct cost. Now, when you look at this, you go, wait, services, consultants. Consultants absolutely are service providers, okay? If we're talking about a consultant, they are giving us a service. But we're naming them separately here because we want to think about this, because we get in trouble if we don't. In general, services are useful labors performed by an individual or organization on behalf of others. So again, if we list what some of these services might be, we see that some of our staff probably does some of this that we already have, right? They perform services probably all the time. As a matter of fact, all of us do, right? We all perform services in the fact of our time, for our employer, to our families, to our friends, for other people. I mean, how many times has somebody asked you to do something because you knew how to do it and maybe they didn't, or because they needed extra hands and you said, okay. So that you're providing services all the time. But services in which we pay a service provider are legally different from services performed by your paid staff. Your paid staff is already getting their wage. That's it. They're done. They get wage and fringe. We've already covered all that. We're not messing with them. We don't care that they give us service. We expect it. Okay. But the difference is that service providers and these consultants are not your employees. Okay. You do not withhold taxes or pay fringe to them. All right. This is what makes somebody a service provider or a consultant. So currently I'm actually working on a foster care evaluation. And as such, I am a service provider / consultant. I'm the lead evaluator. Okay, I am not an employee of that program, right? Because they do not withhold taxes and they do not give me fringe. What they give me is they're paying me on a contractual basis for services provided. Okay, so when you see something on a budget that says contractual services in the grant application package or on your budget form, when you see it, it's talking about services. Okay, contractual services means services. But you have to be really careful here to make sure that you're not trying to sneak somebody in who should be considered a paid employee. Okay, there are very big rules about this from the IRS. They do not want you getting somebody paid for services or consulting fees when they should be considered an actual employee. All right, because if you are withholding taxes from them, they are an employee, right? And if you're not withholding taxes from them, then you can be a service provider or consultant, right? Okay, so again, even if you're tax exempt, the contractor that you're working with is not, and so they're going to be scrutinized just for that. So you want to make sure you can look on the IRS website to see who actually would qualify for this. What are you using them for, and where is that considered? You can talk to the CPA, you can talk to your financial people, just to make sure that you're not considering somebody one or the other. Again, if they're an employee, you're going to have to withhold taxes and provide fringe. If it's a service or consultant, it's a contract for services, and that's going to be the way that works. Okay. Let's talk about real property, which we already said has this formal definition, right? And here's the pieces. It's real land, any of the buildings or improvements on it, any soil, trees, minerals, or water, right? So what's really interesting here is that, think about this, we can actually create real property, right? Because if we do any sort of improvement, if we do some landscaping, if we add to the building, if we do something, we can actually add to that, right? So, and that improvement would be in terms of financial, right? Now, of course, in aesthetic terms, the tract of land might not be improved at all, and maybe environmentalists would not like what we did there, so we have to take those kind of things into consideration. But real property in and of itself, again, we go with that fair market value when we're considering real property, unless we've made changes to it. And then we need to actually take into consideration any changes, good or bad, that we have made to those buildings, okay? So sometimes, again, if we're going to have to make improvements in constructing buildings or doing whatnot, we're going to have to use those service providers that we just asked. And hopefully we can get those service providers to give us to that in kind, so we don't actually have to pay them for that, because a lot of expense. Notice service providers is probably one of the biggest things that we spend outside of payroll, because if you have to go outside of what you have in-house, you're going to pay the fair market value for it, right? And clearly you're typically paying for a professional of some sort. So that may be a really good opportunity for you to see if you can find somebody to offer that in kind, right? Because there are certain things that we just can't get away from as far as cost goes, as in a program or project. But if we can find some service providers to provide some of these things that would really cost quite a bit of money, that would really save us, and it would keep us from having to actually find a service provider to do it. Not always the case, but again, we could try. Equipment, here we go. This is my favorite part, right? Equipment versus material and supplies. All right, so let's look at what this definition is. The tangible, non-expendable personal property charged directly to an award having a useful life of more than 1 year and an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit. However, consistent with recipient policy, lower limits may be established. In other words, here's what it is unless it isn't, right? This is what it means. Now, we're going to break this down just a little bit because it's a little bit trickier than what we think. Let me ask you, and I just want, clearly you don't have to answer me. But is an electric drill a piece of equipment? What about a bathroom scale? Is that equipment? How about the chair in your office? Or the one you're sitting on at home because you don't get to go to the office, right? Are those pieces of equipment? They certainly seem like it. Certainly seems like those are pieces of equipment. But are they equipment from a viewpoint of the grantor, right? So let's think about it. If we look at this, we can sort of break this down into a few pieces. And it gives us 4 characteristics, okay? Here they are. The item must be non-expendable, okay? So non-expendable just means that the item doesn't become used up, right? We don't use it up in the first use, right? Or that an item has too much value that we can't throw it out after we use it once. So examples of things that are expendable, things that we use up: batteries, pencils, paper, food, computer ink cartridges, right? Some things are expendable, but we can reuse them and then discard it later, like paper clips, plastic utensils, things of that nature, right? So it has to be non-expendable, not expendable. We can't use it up in the first time if it's going to be considered equipment. The item must be personal property. Well, if you don't own it, there's a problem there. Okay, so personal property is actually a legal term. All right, remember when we talked about real property and that was land, the buildings on it, and all the soil, water, all those things, right? So that's the legal definition. Here's the cool part. If it's not real property, it's personal, okay? So that's the only distinction. If you can classify it as real, it is. If it's anything else, it's personal. Now here's what's cool. The reason for this is because, let's say it this way. The building that houses your organization is real property, right? But everything inside that building is personal property. And you're saying, well, it doesn't belong to a person per se. The organization owns it, right? Your office chair is not your own unless you've had enough of that office chair and ordered yourself a new one, right? But the reality is, for most of us, those aren't that's not our computer, that's not our desk, that's not our chair. So what do? So they don't really belong to a person, so how are they considered personal property? Well, they are, because actually, from a legal standpoint, any nonprofit or corporation exists as a person. right? An organization in and of itself is considered a person. So if there is something that belongs to that organization, it is considered personal property when you talk about property rights, okay? Now here's a little fun fact. Some of the personal equipment in the building is equipment. Some of it is not. It's like oaks and trees, right? So all oaks are trees, but all trees are not oaks. It's the same thing with personal property. All equipment is personal property because it's inside something, right? It's inside and we're considering that a person. But all personal property is not equipment because it doesn't necessarily meet all the other criteria. So this one piece it meets, it's personal property, okay? But what else? So the third piece is this. The item must have a useful life of some defined term. What is that? Well, typically we see it's a year. It might be as many as 5, depending on what you're talking about. Every organization sets its own terms. And of course, you have to think about depreciation and the rate at which the IRS allows you to depreciate that cost of equipment. So what is considered a useful life? When does it depreciate enough to not be considered useful anymore? So you have to do a little bit of work on that. But usually what you'll see, and the grants typically tell you what equipment breakdown, like what's going to be considered that timeline. And again, typically 1 to 5 years is what we're looking at, okay? And so a lot of things we can still say, okay, let's think about this. Chairs, how about the chairs in our office? Are they non-expendable? Do we use those up the first time? No, we don't. They're not expendable. They are non-expendable, right? Are they personal property? Yes, because they're inside our organization. And should they have a useful life, hopefully of more than a year? Unless we're really tough on that chair, we should at least get a year, maybe 5, 6. Some of you have had that same chair for 15 years, right? But this last little caveat is what typically hangs us up on equipment, right? The cost of the item must meet or exceed an established amount. Now, in the definition that I showed you, it said $5,000. Now that's pretty high. And you don't typically see that at that range all the time, but I've seen some as low as 50, which seems unreasonably low. So what we really want, usually you're gonna see something in the middle at probably about the $3,000 mark. Okay, so now unless you were very fortunate, is your office chair worth $3,000? No. So is it equipment? No, it's not. It meets all the other 3 criteria here, but it is not over that set limit. And again, you'd have to look at the grant to see what is considered equipment. What is that limit it must exceed? But let's think about this. If you have a really fancy copy machine, right, and you're making copies like crazy, that's probably gonna be, you're not gonna use it up in one use. It is personal property because it's inside your organization. It should have a useful life of more than 1 year, and it probably costs more than $3,000, right? Copy machines are not cheap. Okay, so that would in fact be considered equipment. But then, so like our drill that we talked about, the bathroom scale, the office chair, none of those things are equipment, okay? Because they don't cost enough. So that's usually the caveat. So if we're thinking about equipment, what's the cost limit and does it meet that? Typically not, okay? So there are relatively few things that are actually considered equipment, all right? So now that we know what that is, if it's not equipment, then what is it? It's a material or supply, because anything that is not equipment, notice here's a really good definition. We can all walk away and remember that one. All personal property excluding equipment. So if it's not equipment, it's a material or a supply. Okay, now this gets a little bit confusing as to how we categorize this. And fortunately for most of us, materials and supplies is going to be one line item on your budget, so you don't have to really worry about teasing it out too much. It might be good for you to think about that a little bit, but what we usually see, we sort of know what supplies are, right? Supplies are expendable, like things we use up all the time. Ink, paper, chalk, toilet paper, right? Those are supplies. But we can get into a little bit tricky sometimes because what about a computer USB? What about your little flash drive? It's too cheap to be equipment, but it can last a long time. It's not really expendable. What if we think about the wiring that holds all of our internet connection, right? It's not equipment because it doesn't cost enough, but it's not expended either, right? So those kind of things technically would still be supplies. But, right, some places actually do distinguish between the two. Things like USBs and wires are considered material, right? Because those are things that last a little bit longer. Supplies, we tend to think of things that are used up relatively quickly. So materials would be things like books or computer software or anything that we would need to build something like wood or glass, plastic, metal, videos, audios, digital tape, okay? But most places, like I said, will combine these two together, so you don't really have to differentiate. But if you do have to differentiate. The first step is this: is it equipment or not? Probably not. So now we're in that material and supplies. Once we get to material and supplies, do we actually have to separate them or not? If we do, supplies are things we use up relatively quickly: coffee, toilet paper, things like that, paper. Materials are things that last a little bit longer and are technically then not equipment. Okay? What about facilities? Facilities are real property. They can be purchased, leased, rented, or used at no cost in kind. Wouldn't we all be so lucky if our facilities were given to us in kind, right? So what can we do about that? Well, we think of that. So these can be laboratories, libraries, playgrounds, exercise rooms, hospitals, video studios, health clinics, and the list could be practically endless as to what is a facility, right? But facilities, in fact, are real property, okay? So because they are somebody else's building, and how you classify them is dependent on how you're paying for them, right? So we would still look at the market value. If you purchased it, it would be the market value for what you paid for that. If you're leasing it, it's how much it leases for. If you're renting it, same thing. If it's being used at no cost, remember we would go back to that first initial thing that we talked about, and we would actually categorize that based on what that would cost us for that set time, right? So again, if somebody's giving us an office building for the next 6 months, how much would it cost in our fair market value for that particular building for that time, if it's given to us as an in kind? Okay. All right. So let's see, technically, we would have been at break, but since we took one a little bit early, we'll go ahead and go into, if it's okay, Emily, we'll just go ahead and go into that little next section, and then we'll take another little short break after we finish that part before we get into the mystery budget.
Sounds good.
Okay. Oh, see, I put that in there and now you don't get it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about handling the grantor's money, right? All right, so now we have the money, we figured out what we did, we've created some sort of budget that we have to work with, we're beholden to that, we're gonna do what we said we're gonna do, right? We're gonna manage the money the way we said we're gonna manage the money. And now here comes the money. So of course it's gonna show up via check or electronic transfer, right? And what happens when we get to that point? First thing we need to do is make sure we assign it its own account, okay? So if you're new to this, if today you're thinking, okay, I'm about ready to get this grant, make sure that wherever that money is going to be housed, that it's in and of itself by itself, okay? If you need it to be its own account, at the very least, it needs to be an own account number, right, in your chart of accounts. Now, you're either going to debit or credit that whole amount that you receive in the account. Now, whether or not you're going to consider that a debit or credit when you first take that money in depends on whether you're a full-fledged accountant or if you're like most of the rest of us, you don't really do double entry bookkeeping, and we're using just a regular accounting software. So if we're doing that, we're going to credit our account, okay? Because what we call a debit, an accountant calls a credit, all right? So there's a difference there, and that's why accounting seems to be scary for everybody. But part of it is that we can do it. I mean, that's the real, you know, I hope everybody realizes that today. If you're in a position where you're managing grants and you think, I have zero financial background whatsoever, it's okay, because you don't have to do it the way an accountant does to keep track of the money, right? You really just have to document. You have to do what you say you're going to do, all right? And if you do those things, you will still be okay as far as your grantor goes, all right? So now any cash that you receive from any other source, so let's say your organization is going to contribute, you know, helping you pay those matching funds, and it's a cash match, and so you've got $2,000 coming from them. All of that needs to go into that same account, right? You want to make sure all the money moving, because remember, the grant budget is not the same thing as the total thing. So any money that's coming in has to go into that same account so we can keep track of the differences. And we're going to need to keep track of what we have to pull out for the grant to let them know versus what our total project budget is, right? So our total project budget shows us how the cash total is to be expended, right? Normally, a grantor requires that the budget has several line items, often divided by the types of the direct costs that we just talked about, right? And this line item budget serves as our grant project budget, right? It tells us exactly how much we can spend on every type of direct expense. Now, those line items, as I mentioned, that's a good start. If we can elaborate on some of that, that's fantastic, okay? If we can elaborate on that. But sometimes the other piece of this that we can use, and I'm just going to pull this up because I pulled an example. is called the budget justification, or that budget narrative that I mentioned before, okay? So the budget narrative actually provides us the detail of exactly how we're going to spend the money. So remember when I said you wanted to manage, you want to do what you said you're going to do, and you want to spend the money the way you said you're going to spend it, okay? How do we know, right? Again, some of you are just being given this budget, so you need to go asking questions. Where is the budget justification? Where is the budget narrative, okay? Because that is going to specifically say, right? And I just actually pulled this one. This is an example from MSU, actually, from Montana State, about how they do their budget justifications for particular projects. Notice how it says here, this is a budget justification, sometimes actually called a budget narrative. And here's the thing, sometimes money, budget categories actually appear in your budget narrative, and sometimes it doesn't. It's always best though, here's a general good rule. If you know the amount you're gonna spend in the category, put it in there. It does two things. One, it lets them know what you're planning to spend the money on, and it lets you know later when you're keeping yourself in check if you did in fact do what you said you were going to do, okay? So that's a really big deal here. All right, notice if we're looking at these categories, so key senior personnel. For every PI, co-PI, or project director, list, name, title, amount of time to be spent on the project, and what he or she will accomplish. And here's the example, it's in red. Look what they actually said. Dr. Smith is going to serve as the principal investigator. He's going to commit 2 summer months of effort to the project. Or she, I'm sorry. She will primarily be responsible for ... And that's where you would list the things that they were actually going to be responsible for. And the total salary requested for Dr. Smith for that 2 months' time is $11,111. And how did they get that? They calculated it, they said, from a base academic salary of $50,000. How much is her time worth for that 2 months if the base salary is $50,000? But they're telling you in that budget narrative, when you're writing that budget narrative, so if you're getting ready to ask for a grant, you're going to need the budget narrative, right? If you already have a grant, there should be a budget narrative, okay? If you're new to this and somebody else wrote the grant, go looking for the budget narrative, because this is what you told the grantor you were going to do with the money before they ever gave it to you, okay? This is what you need to go off of when you're trying to do your job. Oh my goodness, we need to pay Dr. Smith $11,111. How did we get to that? Because maybe next year we need Dr. Smith for 3 months. We say, okay, we're going to bump his salary. How do we figure out how much more? Well, it should come from that base academic salary of $50,000, because that's what we're using here. And it's in our budget narrative. We actually have that reference to that material. And then we can double check to make sure we're doing it properly, right? So here's the next piece. Research text, lab manager, students. It says the example here is one undergraduate student will commit 10 hours per week at $10 an hour for 30 weeks and will be responsible for XYZ, total requests $3,000, okay? And then they added those together and said, okay, the total personnel cost will be $14,111. So again, this budget narrative just gives you not only what you need to know that you need to do, it tells the grantor what you're gonna do, and that's what they're gonna hold you to. Okay, they're going to hold you to this budget. So your line item little budget that says, oh, your line item budget is actually going to say personnel 14,111, right? But actually, you're going to be paying Dr. Smith $11,100, and you're going to be paying an undergrad student $30,000. So it needs to be in there, right? You need to have that not only on your budget narrative, but probably even on your line item if you can do it. Okay, but you may only need to turn over this line item and personnel to your actual grant, but you're going to have to include the budget narrative anyway. And here's that fringe benefit. Look at this. Fringe benefits are calculated using current approved institutional rates of 19.016% for faculty and 0.440% for students. So key senior personnel benefits, notice they just did the math. Basic, simple, right? They found the fringe benefit. There is a rate, so they didn't have to calculate that part. And they said, okay, our key senior personnel benefits are $11,111 times 19.016%. So that's an extra $2,113 plus 2 months of health insurance, which is $1,054, and the student benefits total $13 for student worker, right? Notice how much we paid in fringe for the actual professor there. So, but still, total benefits that we have to take into account. Notice that's $4,233. Very big deal. See that fringe? That's going to come back to bite you if you don't calculate that properly, right? So get that fringe rate, see what you're doing, and make sure in your budget narrative you've accounted for all those things, right? Because look, our personnel cost is only $14,000, right? So we're thinking, oh, we could do this for 14 grand. No, we can't, because we still have this $4,000 that we need to include, right, of fringe. All right, and again, then it goes on to show you travel, all these things that we've just talked about. Oh, look, we've talked about travel, we've talked about personnel, my goodness, we're actually doing this the right way. It's good. So equipment, here we go, total equipment. Now notice this, in order to complete AIM-2, a high power microscopy lens is required. This lens will enable researchers to detect the presence of damaged protons. Now, so their limit, look at this, what did they just do? Dun, 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 mistake, right? Because what did they say? Equipment is an item of lasting value with a cost of over $5,000. How much is this microscopy lens? $2,355. See, people make that mistake all the time. Why? Because you're thinking it's a microscopy lens, like it's really important, we're gonna keep it forever, it's super expensive, it must be equipment. But by their own definition, they just did it wrong. And I didn't even do that. I just thought we were going through here, so that's awesome. That's hilarious. Okay, but again, make sure that, so that should actually be down in some other category, right? Notice they don't have in materials and supplies here, right? I don't see it. Here's other direct, oh, hey, ooh, look, they try to put in their direct costs, supplies, and contractual services, right? Those are listed as separate categories. So here's supplies, here's contractual services, here's what they're contracting out for. And those are those direct costs. So we did just talk about that, right? So the total direct cost, woo, $30,000. We're spending a lot here. And then here's the indirect cost. And see, they have a rate. Indirect costs are calculated using MSU billings, federally negotiated rate of 51% of salaries and wages. So here's what that is total. So total indirect cost, $7,197. Again, this is not, you don't have to be financial wizards to be able to do some of these indirect cost type things on the fringe. You just need to ask what your rate is. What rate do you go by? And then the math is actually not that difficult, because you take how much do you have times whatever this rate is, and that will give you the indirect cost that you need to go on there, okay? Total requested amount for this particular thing, $37,954. So, and I did put, and I'll send that. I added that into a reference, but I did it later than after Emily sent it to you. So I'll make sure and send this link, and she'll get that out to you. And again, I just Googled it, and I picked this one honestly because it was MSU billings, and that's Montana. So there we go, let's use it. All right, okay. So that should get us to there. All right. Now that we've looked a little bit at that budget narrative, how do we handle it? Like, how are we physically handling this? Okay, so first of all, we want to make sure that all expenditures are by check, never with cash, right? The exception to this rule of no cash is, of course, petty cash, right? For some of us, we may have to use it, but let's try to keep that petty cash low, right? Under typically $20 is as much as we need for petty cash, unless you have a big reason for needing more than $20. But you want to write a check out and call it petty cash to start with. And then every time anybody takes anything out of petty cash, make sure you have that receipt, right? And of course, if you keep the $20, that way if somebody has to come up with putting more money back into petty cash because somebody forgot to turn in a receipt, it's not going to be for that much, right? So you always want to make sure that you're doing that accounting and keep that petty cash low. You don't want any cash walking off for whatever reason, right? You want to protect yourself and anybody else that's working with them. So the next thing I would suggest here is very important, keeping authority to spend the money as concentrated as possible, okay? Now, granted, staff members are going to have to be able to obtain the stuff and do their jobs. We get that. But the purchase of these things should be centralized, right? You want that spending authority in just one people or a small group of people, depending on how large your program or project is or your group, right? And one way to really do this to show financial responsibility is to require 2 signatures on checks. Okay, so if you're in charge of the check writing, see if you can have a second signer, right? I have this, I'm fortunate that we have this. I have to have this for my treasurer for the booster board, but it's actually great that I have to do that, okay? Because here's what that does, it covers me. So let's say I have an invoice and I've paid that invoice. That's great, I read the check out, whatever, and I still have the invoice, I know I have that paperwork, but there's never a question then because somebody else had to sign off on the fact that I paid that invoice, okay? So they know it is for something that we actually use. I didn't create this invoice, I didn't make it up. They know that we did in fact buy new uniforms for the basketball, and it did in fact cost $12,000. Go ahead, try to write a check for that amount. That kills you, especially when it's not your own money, right? So it's great to have somebody else have to sign when I have to write out a check for that much, right? That is not actually my money, but that I'm managing for the program. So it's always good. If you're not doing that, if you don't have 2 people to sign checks. Now, make sure it's somebody who's there. You're gonna get a second signer. I'm lucky on the booster board. we have lots of members to Booster, but we actually have 4 people who are officers, okay, 4 officers. So what we have is I'm actually responsible as the treasurer. My signature has to be on every check. But the other 3 have signed up with the bank to allow them to be check signers. So as long as one of the other 3 ladies is available, I have an option of a second signer. So I don't have to just go to one person, but I only need 1 more to get it done, okay? So really just a good way of checking balance and making sure that you are covered, right? You want to be sure you've covered yourself as much as you can as well. Now, of course, we want to require complete documentation on anything we spend of any size or any kind, big or little. We get lucky here because the good part about when we're spending money is a lot of times, especially if we've done it correctly, we already have the documentation, right? So complete documentation of the transaction is actually just protection for you. So we want to make sure everything that's financial we have track of. We want to be able to prove where every penny went, right? Grantors are not happy if we can't show them where the money went, right? Show me the money. Well, they want to know, show me where it went, right? What did you do? So one, there's really only 2 reasons to not have the documentation for this. The first one is that the money was spent in the ways that you don't want to tell the grantor, which is bad, right? Or the second one is that you're sloppy or inept at handling the finances and you're like, oh, shoot. And either one of those things are not acceptable to grantors. So there's an example. You have a record of expenditure right here in your handouts for the day. So here's the person, again, just this is a generic one that you can use. How much did it cost? What did we get it for? What was our purchase order? This one's, were the items in good condition? Why did we pay for it? Did we have this? Who was it approved by? So that maybe that's you that's writing the check, and then maybe you have your second signer here. So just, again, a simple little record of expenditure to help keep it together. And it doesn't matter what kind of forms you're using, as long as you use the same forms, right? Don't have the forms for these kind of things and forms for these kind of, if they're the same type of thing, make sure that you're keeping the same format so you're getting the right information from all of them. Because I think that's, somebody's like, oh, just write that down. Oh, just keep trying, you don't want to do that, right? You want to make sure it's all the same. Okay, so up until this point, we've actually looked at finances from the viewpoint of the grantor, right? But you have more responsibility than that. And that seems unfortunate, but it's just the way it works, right? While you have to answer for the money the way the grantor says so, you also have to think about this. Is your program or project housed within another organization? If it is, you're going to need to take care of your finances also in the way that they want you to. Maybe it's governmental that you need to think about. So maybe federal government, federal regulations, state regulations, local, county, city, any other levels that apply to your location, okay? So who you're answering to, you are actually responsible that your financial transactions meet all applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations. So it's not just what does the grantor want. Are you following all of the rules and regulations for your county, city, federal government, right? You are actually responsible that all your financial transaction meets all of them, okay? Now that really sounds like a lot, but here's the good part. All you have to do is spend the money exactly the way you said you would and keep a record, okay? That's it. Get all this to it, but really that's when it gets overwhelming. Just stop and think about, okay, what is my job here? Spend the money exactly as you said you would and keep your records. Because if you do that, every single thing that the federal, the state, the local, or the grantor is going to ask you, you got it, okay? So it doesn't matter. You're going to have that. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming and it doesn't have to be scary. Just keep it. Keep it. Document, 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 right? All right. Of course, we want to keep regular financial reports. That's a huge deal for us. And how do we do that? Well, for sure, at the end of every month, right? As the manager of the project, we have to require regular financial reports that do the detail. We want to see them at least once a month, right? At least once a month, maybe even once a week, depends on how much of a micromanager you are, right? And that all depends on how you're running your organization. So we want to see the detailed current balance in the grant account, the balances in the budget line items, and all the expenditures since the last report, because this represents the financial life of your project. A complete series of this actually is a record and outline form of your financial life, right? And you do actually also have a quick monthly financial report in your template, in your packet. So again, it's basic, but here it is. Here's what you had, here's what you spent, here's how much you have left, right? Just at least we have to have something. And again, we're going to be able to use some of this information that we have off here later to do a variance analysis to sort of see where we are, do a little checkup on our budgeting type thing. So this is going to be good. Again, if you already have one of these, that's great. If you don't, make sure you're having a monthly financial report. All right, let's talk a little bit about payroll. Now, hopefully you'll get lucky and payroll will be taken care of by the payroll department, right? But that's not always the case. So we do have three possibilities for handling payroll. One, like I just said, your organization actually has a payroll officer person, and that's where we're going to handle that payroll, right? So maybe we get lucky and we don't even have to worry about it. But the second thing is that the project itself will have to have a payroll person or a payroll office. Maybe you're just like the only little small entity where you're at and there is no payroll anything, and so it's going to be your job to do that. And so maybe you will have to handle that payroll. Or the last option here is that you might actually have to contract for services. You might need a service provider to contract to handle payroll. Some of you, I know that your counties, in fact, do have, right, payroll is done by a service provider, you're done by an outside place. So it's not, you don't even have it in-house. So regardless of that method, you're gonna have to think about a few things. Now, again, they're not overly complicated, but they are. Here's what I always say to students. You know, I teach a lot of methods courses, and every time I start when we talk about statistics or methods or money of any sort, right, everybody's always scared to death of it, right? And I always tell them this: it's not hard, it's new. Okay, think about it. It's not hard, it's new. Most of us have done our best to keep up with our checkbooks, right? Which are not even any more checkbooks. It's all online stuff, right? Oh, debit here, debit here, debit here, right? But we're not, when we have been given this kind of money and we're responsible for it, it automatically seems hard because it's new, okay? It's not necessarily hard, it's just new, okay? So if you're the one that's going to be in charge of doing this, and even if you have to deal with it at all, if you're managing the project, you will have to deal with payroll of some sort, and we'll see how in a minute. But you do have a few options here. But just remember, this can be learned. There are steps to follow and things that you can do, okay? Now, let's go here. All right, so the process of payroll accounting is very exact. Practitioners who do this operate with exactness and precision. They have to. Think about it. They're handling the one thing people care the most about, and that's money. Why do you care the most about it? Because it pays your bills, right? I mean, you have to have that. And so think about your payroll department. Like literally their job, they're so focused on what they're doing because they're directly answerable to every employee who gets a check, right? What if they don't take out enough taxes? What if they take out too much taxes? What if they didn't pay you by your actual rate? What if they didn't take out the fringe? I mean, think about all the things that payroll actually has to do that. So a payroll department is actually very focused, right? So if your job, if you have a payroll department, you have to do your job to not mess them up, okay? That's the key. You have to complete all the paperwork that you're supposed to, get it filed, do it on time. Make sure that all the financial transactions are taking place when you're supposed to. You do not want payroll being held up because you didn't do your job. And if you're lucky enough that you have a payroll department, for certain, do not put them behind, right? Okay, now, one thing that we have to think about in this is internal transfer of funds. So remember when I told you that we were gonna have to put that money into an account when it first comes in? As the manager of that, probably you're gonna be in charge of distributing funds, which also means that even if you're not doing payroll yourself, you're gonna have to transfer that fund to payroll so they can pay people, right? So you're still gonna have to be in charge of that money at some point. And anything else that has to take care of, so deposit of taxes that are withheld from employees, deposit of employer contributions like the FICA, the SUTA, and the FUTA that we talked about earlier. If they have healthcare insurance, retirement, all that fringe, anything that you're gonna need so that payroll can do their job, you're gonna have to internally transfer those funds to do it. So that means you have to know enough from the payroll to know what that stuff would cost, okay? That's why we covered those things, because some of you, I know, we're probably thinking, I don't do payroll, what do I need to worry about fringe? Well, you do, because it has to go in your budget, and because you're gonna actually have to transfer that internal transfer funds to do so, okay? Now, the other kicker to this is the paperwork that goes with it, right? So you're gonna need to make sure that their W-2s are filed with Social Security. You're gonna have to give the W-2s to employees to begin with. You need to make sure you've completed, have obtained completed W-4 forms, right? Because the quarterly supports, you have to be responsible for doing quarterly SUTA reports and maintenance of payroll tax deposit receipts. So the federal government and the state government do not look upon you very well if you have not done these things on time, right? So you also have a personnel reporting checklist in your packet. And this just helps us, I think, to look. And again, you would want this for all of the people that you have and for the period. You could either do it like this. This is just for one period, so it could be all the people. But look, it actually just gives you a checklist. So here's the things. You put a check mark over here. Did you transfer the funds? Did you deposit the state taxes? Did you deposit the FICA funds, right? And when did you do that for? What period was for that, or who was for that? So I would rearrange this just a little bit, but at least it covers like all those things I just talked about. Have you done those pieces? And for some of you, maybe you don't have to do all of this because payroll takes care of some of that for you. But if you're the one in charge of having to do this, this is really nice to make sure you don't forget something really important. Okay. Like I said, personnel reporting. Now, purchasing services, okay? Most of you won't have to do this, but you might. You might have to, maybe you have to go outside to get payroll even. So think about this. You need to know exactly what it is that you want. Make a list. What do you need them to do specifically for you? Because if you don't, if you just be like, oh, we need to hire somebody to do, no, what do you need? We're specifically gonna need somebody to do payroll for 5 employees. It's gonna, right? What do we need? So that's first. You want to create a job specification document. So here's the little things that we expect. Here's what we need from you. Here's what we want you to do. All right. Then we're going to want to get bids that incorporate this. Okay. Now you may say, what? If we're not going to do like massive overhaul where we need big equipment, we don't necessarily need a bid. Now I did put a bid packet in your handouts. It's still good. Okay. Because here's the thing. Even if you don't get bids, maybe you just know so-and-so. Maybe that's the only accountant in town. Okay, so maybe that's it. That's it. That's all your choice. But even so, put on there that you didn't do the bid, but pull that bid request and put that you did it because that was the only person that was available. So if somebody asks later why, I mean, if you pick your brother-in-law to be the accountant, you better have a reason. You better have at least looked into seeing if there's somebody else that's there, and a bid request will help you do that. You want to make sure that you're covering the basis if you have to contract out for services. Okay. You want to get references and check with the references. And then, of course, if you accept somebody's bid, you want to respond to that in writing. You for sure want to oversee the work regularly. Here's fun. This one we forget. Be in charge. They're working for you. And you're thinking, well, I don't know anything about payroll. How am I supposed to do that? Well, are they doing it on time? Are they covering it? Are they taking out the taxes they're supposed to be doing? Are your people getting paid when they're supposed to get paid? Well, if they are, then okay, right? And if you don't know what you're doing as far as looking for service providers, ask someone else, right? That's the good part about humans, right? We're all good at different things, and almost always you can find somebody that either works in your organization or with you that knows more than you realize that they do, right? Because we all wear multiple hats for lots of things. So we can see if we're not experts in some of these services that we're having to contract out for, we can actually ask for those kind of things for help, okay? And pay only when the work is completed to your complete satisfaction. When you contract out for services, right? Again, this is not the time to be wishy-washy, all right? You don't just be like, oh, they sort of did it, it's good, right? I mean, this is your grant money you're using, and you want your program or project to move forward. And if you actually get to the point where you have to pay for services, make sure you get what you asked for and what you're paying for, right? It's okay to say, no, this isn't enough if it doesn't meet the contractual obligations of what was in the bid, okay? Again, nobody likes to be that person, but that's part of the job as the management. So a couple little things here just at the end. These are just little fun management maxims. They're super easy. There's 2 slides worth on this. And after we get through these, we'll just take another little 5-minute break before we move to the next little round. So here they are. First of all, we want to comply with our organization's financial policies and procedures. Simple, right? Basically, you could really print out these 2 slides and hang them in your office, all right? Because this is just the things that you want to make sure you're doing, all right? Spend the money the way you said you would in the proposal. Document every single financial transaction, no matter how small. Use professionals when you don't know what you're doing, okay? If you can't do something, contract out for that. Then you have to comply with the reporting requirements of your grantor, your organization, and federal, state, and local governments. That's the kicker, right? But remember, if you spend the money the way you said you would and you keep a record of it, you're going to be able to do that. Be thorough. This is the budget and all the budget narrative and all the documentation that you do. This is not the time to skimp out, okay? You don't want to be doing that. You want to be on time, Remember, payroll's counting on you. The people are counting on you. Your project, your program are counting on you. When you are not on time, everything else below you gets pushed back, right? Be prudent. Think about this. Is this what you need to do? Is this a decision? Did you pick the right person for service providing, right? Is there somebody else that's better? You want to be honest. When in doubt, ask, okay? Always ask. Now, again, some people are always worried about asking the grantor, but they actually typically have a fiscal person that's with the grant because they know people are going to have questions about how do we manage the grant and how do we do this and where do we put this particular thing in the budget. Call them, right? Email them. Whoever your contact person is, I'm certain all of you have a contact person for your grant, right? Do not wait till the end of the year and think you have it figured out and then, oh my goodness, you put it in the wrong spot, or oh my goodness, you didn't do this, you didn't record this. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. So you don't want to do that. So when in doubt, ask the grantor's fiscal thing, okay? So that's our financial management maxims. Like I said, we could probably print those off and stick them on our wall and keep us beholden to doing what we said we're going to do. So let's go ahead. We're going to come back and do a little fun activity that is actually going to put us in a breakout room. You know, when I say fun, it's budgeting, but it's not, okay? It's already been done for you. We're just going to take a look at it. So let's take 5 minutes and get regrouped, and then we'll come back and go to breakout.
Sounds good.
So here's our mystery budget challenge. So this is just a fun little quick exercise. You have it in your packet. So what you're going to do is just read through it and then answer I think there's 5 questions together, and then you guys can discuss it yourself. So what we'll do is Emily's going to throw you in a breakout room. So maybe when you start, a couple things. One, turn your video on so you can see one another while you're in the breakout room, and then also spend a couple minutes and introduce yourself to who you're with in your breakout room so we can see who's here and what's what. And then, like I said, I'll give you a few minutes to read through it, look through it, and see what the questions are, and go ahead and discuss with each other. And then we'll come back and sort of come up with what did we come up with. And if you need something, there's a little button in your breakout room that actually you can call us into the breakout room and we shall show up. So Emily, do you want to go ahead and turn those on?
Yes, and if for some reason you don't have that mystery budget in the emails I sent you, let me know and I can send it to you now. And yeah, you'll see an invite pop up for your breakout rooms. There's about 5 in a room. All right, looks like folks are moving around.
Good, because I don't know if we told them that they had to hit the join.
Hit the join button for those that haven't. There's a few folks, they might have wandered off. If anyone's having trouble, again, you can use the chat, holler at me. Okay, there's at least 3 or 4 in each one, so that's good.
And it looks like Lynn doesn't have audio or video.
I messaged her, it went private, but she can chat in her breakout group.
Okay.
Got those. And then Trish, if you want to, I can send you to any of those if you'd like to check in with them.
Okay.
And then if you bounce back to the main room, I can throw you in another one, so.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give them, so a couple minutes that they just, for introduction, and then give them time to read, look through it and start to answer, and then I'll start popping in. How many breakout rooms did you make?
There are 5.
Okay.
There was about, 5 rooms with 5 people, though not everyone is actually there.
Okay. So I'll just give them a couple minutes, and then, like I said, I can start going in there and just make sure they're okay. typically what I mean, again, these are adults, and so they probably won't ask for any help. But this is about the time where I think, oh, okay, I'll just sit here for a minute, and then my students will be like, hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, I need help. I need help.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward. The first question is really tricky. The rest of them, though, you have to just think about it for a minute.
I'll
And
be
again,
right back.
Technically challenged.
Hi, Katie Smith? Did
A
you?
technology challenge, I should say.
Oh, she's got her audio going. Okay, just making sure.
I don't think she can hear us though, Emily.
Oh,
Nope, you can't hear. No.
We can hear her, but
okay, but she
hear
can't
us.
hear you guys. You can use the chat. She messaged me about that, and I wasn't sure how to fix it.
Okay.
I can't hear anything. Ah.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind using the chat with her.
Shoot.
Did you get that, Nathan? That message?
Nathan might have frozen. Oh, there you go. Cool. Okay. You guys should all be on chat.
and you have to sit all the time. And now it's like, oh, I maybe need to sit down for a minute.
I have one of those yoga ball chairs, so I try it. It's at least helps my posture and my back.
Yeah, that would be great. But I was sitting so much when we moved to remote, you know, when I teach my online classes, like for the UM, I can, you know, I log into my stuff and then I can pop up and go do something else and come back to it. Well, when Fullerton had to move to remote, we actually still had to meet at the time we were supposed to meet through Zoom. So I was sitting through like 4.5 hours in the afternoon of classes because I had back-to-back classes, and I used to stand to teach, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I just felt like I was dying to have to sit all the time. So I just got one of those really cheap extenders that goes on top of my actual desk, which is good until you want to sit down.
Yeah.
And I usually just go in the living room if I want to sit down, but I didn't figure I wanted to take the whole class of the webinar with me to the living room today. So.
Yeah, this will be kind of odd. Like breakout room 5, all people went in. So there's 5 in that room. But like breakout room 2 ended up only with 2.
Well, that's okay. I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, it shouldn't be anything. Well, you can throw me in room 2 if you want. I can make sure they're all right.
Oh, okay. That might be good. Okay, you should have an invite.
Okay.
I think Katie Smith here, I think she actually logged in again. Like she logged out and logged back in because I saw her on video a minute ago.
Hi, this is Katie.
Oh,
Can you hear
hey.
me?
Are you?
Hi. There's 2 of me. I'm sorry. I'm on my phone, but it's dying. And so I'm trying to use my computer, but my computer audio is not working, but you guys can hear me in the breakout room.
Oh,
So I'm
that's what
trying to
was
figure
going
out-
on. Okay.
What's that?
Oh, well, I was curious what was going on. Are you able to chat with your group?
They can hear me, but I can't hear them.
But
So I'm
can
wondering
you-
if I need to like get out and then go back in to, what do you call it? Call in using a phone instead of my
Oh.
computer's audio, because that's what I chose as my computer's audio because it's
Yeah.
always worked for me, and I cannot hear for the life of me. My sound is on.
Yeah, you might have to call in. I was going to say they were supposed to be texting you through the chat box.
Temporarily,
Yeah,
and
they are.
Okay.
They are, but it would be easier and faster to communicate through like audio.
For sure. If you want, you can come out and I'll let you back in and put you back in a room.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, worth a shot.
Okay. Bye.
Great. I was gonna say, if not, we could probably send her second person to that.
It doesn't come up. It doesn't come up as a second person that wasn't assigned.
Weird.
So I couldn't put that. Yeah, because sometimes, yeah, you end up with two.
That's very weird.
Yeah, that's why I went in there to her room earlier.
Hmm.
'Cause I was like, how's things?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we have like AJ, Shannon, Sarah, Patty, Natasha, and Olivia that are still in here with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm thinking that you wandered.
You may have stepped away for a break in just.
Mm-hmm. Yay, Katie Smith.
I'm back.
Hi, dear.
Hi, that worked out great because Janet was in there by herself. So
Oh, okay.
it looked like she had two, but there actually wasn't two. It was just her. So.
Oh.
But she didn't need any help. She already knew what she was doing.
Okay. So did you get an invite, Katie? Mm.
Hmm.
I don't know what's.
Yeah, it looks like it's connecting.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear us, Katie. It says that you're connecting to audio. And I reassigned you to a breakout room with the same folks. Sorry, it's so complicated. And then Alexa's breakout room. Oh, now we have Trisha back. There's only one person in breakout room 2. I don't know who the second person was that wanted.
That's, like I said, that was somebody that wasn't in there. That's where I just went. Because Janet just came back out. I told her, because she's finished, so I told her she could just come on back. And then
Oh,
the other person that's in the breakout room wasn't there.
David. Oh, weird. Okay, because it says it says that he is. How bizarre. Okay. This is the hard part with some of these.
Well, again, luckily it's not over hard. So just thought if I give him a chance to talk for a minute.
Yeah, for sure. And we definitely still have a few other rooms that have a good chunk of people, so
Okay.
we'll have some thoughts on it. I'm gonna assume no luck yet, Katie Smith.
Yeah, it looks like she's trying to call in maybe.
Oh.
She might have had to.
Oh, she's in her breakout room now.
Oh, okay.
So we've got some folks coming back.
Good deal.
Hi, Trish. Good to see you.
I
Hi.
have something for you, but it seems a little inappropriate to share it with others.
I know. Yes, I know what it is. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Mhm.
I'm intrigued.
It's a mystery, Emily.
Surprise for
We'll
Alexa.
come to that part of the program.
That's the mystery part. Everything is. Alrighty. So however long you want to keep them in there, Trish, whenever you want them all to be done, I can send them a little message and boot them out.
Let's see.
Y'all can just chill.
Let's just give them like one more minute just to make sure, and then go ahead and bring them back because probably they just don't know how to get out of the breakout room, some of them.
Yeah, that's fair.
Terry, it looks like you're having trouble with your camera. Did it
Yeah.
break?
What are you doing, Terry? You have like a hole you're looking through. Mic is up, Terry.
It's the cover on my tablet. The holes don't
Oh,
work. The camera doesn't line up with the hole.
Oh my gosh. I was like, did it break?
Maybe I just need to buy a new cover because this
Yeah.
one's all.
That's so funny. It looks, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, Emily, why don't you go ahead and call them back?
Okay, closing the rooms.
They're all gonna be like, where are we going? What just happened?
Right? We'll magically transfer them back. It gives them a 60-second countdown, so it might take a
Oh, okay, good. That's new. It used to be like 25 seconds.
I think you
So-
can set it, and I think the default is 60, and so unless you go in.
Which I like the 60. Like I said, when my students are doing that now, because if they're if they're working on something together, if you don't know it's going to shut off, then all of a sudden they're just gone.
Exactly. It's like, bloop.
So
Yay, so many faces.
we're back.
Woohoo. Cool. Okay. Everyone should be back.
Okay, good. All right, so how was the mystery budget? It was fun and exciting, wasn't it? It is always good though to look, you know, what I like, of course, is that's relatively simple. A lot of you probably have more complicated type budgets, but you know, what's interesting to me is, can you look at another budget, right? So I teach regression analysis to my undergrads, and part of what I make them do at the end of the semester is everybody has to do a regression for their paper, right? But the real key is, did they learn how to read one overall, right? So it's one thing, you spent the whole semester learning about these two variables and you ran the regression, of course you're going to be able to read that one because you've done everything on that one, right? But if somebody else gets up to present their regression, do you actually know how to read that, right? And my whole plan is that you do know how to read that, right? And so it's the same kind of thing with this, is yes, you're comfortable probably with your own budget, and maybe you've been using that same kind of thing, same template forever, but if you picked up a different one, would you be able to recognize the pieces of it based on that? And if somebody picked up your budget, would it be a mystery? Or would they be able to read what it says? Like, do you have enough detail in there? Have you included enough of the pieces, right? So what do we think? Does anybody want to chime in here and see what, for question number one, what payroll employee is going to spend the most time on the project? Janet, you can tell us because I know you got it right.
Well, let me get my sheet again. Associate Program Director at 5%.
Yeah, because at 5%, right? So we're looking at that percentage piece in there. So that can be a little tricky because if we start looking at dollar numbers that go with that, right? We're looking at percentage is what's going to tell us about that we'll spend the most amount of time on that project. So where's this project going to take place?
Hey Trish, I have a question.
Yes.
Why? So we were looking, the group that we had, the project coordinator. So how is that other personnel broke out? Because we look at that and see the $8,000. So is that more of a consultant, or is that?
Oh, well, see, you got tricked. Sorry, Janae.
I did.
So it's because look what you did. That's the other personnel. So technically, and it's because the question's not very clear. And I thought the same thing when I looked before because I would have looked. But notice that it's the salaried personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these other people are just other personnel. So they're paid by the hour, right? So what the question is actually supposed to be asking you, it's a payroll employee. Well, and again, there's that wording piece in the question. Should have said salaried employee. And I actually meant to tell you that when you went to the breakout room and I forgot. So that's a good question. But that's what it is. It's because notice how there's two separate categories here. Because they're counting, and again, this is an interesting field, and that's why we look at some of these things sometimes. Notice how in those salaried employees that fringe is included.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second one, the project coordinator, right? Is the coordinator an employee or not?
Well, we don't know.
Well, it doesn't look like it, because why?
Because it's not in the salary piece.
But it's also not including the fringe.
Right.
There's no taxes withheld, so there's not an actual employee. So that's somebody who's contracted out is what they've done here. But see, we have to look for that because we don't see any taxes withheld, no fringes included. So that's why it's not the project coordinator, because that's actually a service provider in this case.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so where's this going to be? Where's it going to take place?
Out the library.
It's at the library, right? Yay! It's at the library where all good fun things go. Right. All right. So the project's going to take place in the library. How many activities are there going to be, and what will these activities consist of?
This is Mackenzie. We came up with 10 activities based in the library and by the artists, potentially putting on an event or a class.
Exactly. And how did you know that?
Because it said you were paying them 10 times their base wage.
Right. So that 10 gave us away there, right? Because they're right next to each other. Otherwise, it was funny because when I first looked at this, I thought, how are we supposed to know that, right? It doesn't, it's not safe, but it does actually, you know, and again, this is one of those opportunities for you. If somebody else would look at your budget and not understand what you're doing, you might want a little more detail to go with that. But we were able to actually, and mostly because I would guess that the reason we were able to tell that more than anything is because it was 10 in both, right? So 10, okay, we're gonna have artists come 10 times. That was easy to see, and we know they're gonna be at the library. So yes, probably either a class or a painting, maybe like, you know, where you actually get to just do it. Maybe they're teaching something about art. We don't really know that part for sure, but we do know in fact that we're gonna pay an artist 10 different times to come to the library, and we're gonna have to pay for that space 10 different times. That library didn't give us that in kind. Come on now. Somebody needs to get to work. All right, so those are those two things that we have. And how are we gonna pay for this?
Anybody?
Bueller? Okay, so if we go down there.
Donating.
Oh.
The library's donating the.
Yes, so there is a space donation here, but we're still paying for the what? So they're letting us have the space, but they're charging us the usage fee. So like for the lights and for the personnel that are going to be there, that they have to pay to be at the library when they're there. So they're going to give us the space, but not the usage. Bummer. Okay, so we're getting that. So we're going to pay for it with that. Also, what? Who's the big payer here?
It looks like there's 5 sources of income at the bottom.
Right. And who's spending the most?
That would be Con Edison.
Con Edison, about $30,000, right? Good. So see, that wasn't that bad. And hopefully your budgets are even easier to read than this. I highly doubt it, but there you go, right? Because you probably have a lot more things on your budget than this one. All right, so that was your first foray and sort of reading numbers. And then we're gonna get into, let me get rid of this so we can go back here. I'm gonna go ahead back to screen share mode. Actually, let me do this first where it doesn't like me. I've learned that this little Zoom gets particular if you're not careful. So, all right, and we're back to the mystery budget slide. Good. Okay, so, hey, guess what? We're rocking and rolling here. This next little section is the last part. You have to listen to me talk, and then you get to actually do your own little variance analysis. And I love variance analysis because it's not overly difficult to compute. And like I said, we can use Excel to take care of it for us. And it really is a nice snapshot for us. But there's a few things we want to cover when we get to this and make sure that we understand what is the variance analysis and why do we care and why is it useful for us, okay? So let's first talk about what that is. Most of us sort of know, I think. Variance is just a difference between what actually happened and what we expected to happen, right? And we have variance in everything we do, right? If any of us would have said this is what we'd be doing in May, right? Variance-wise is a very big difference from what we were used to doing probably most Mays or Aprils or Marches, right? So we have a variance here. That's a difference between that. So when we're talking about a variance analysis, right, this is just a technique that we use in budgeting in which realized values are compared with budgeted values to help control operations, okay? So here's our budget. here's what we should be doing, here's what's actually happening, oh my goodness, what's the difference and where's the problem? Okay, so variance analysis, again, focuses on these differences between realized values and forecasts, and it's an important technique when we're controlling financial performance. Okay, the last thing we want to do is wait till the end of the year and figure out that we have this huge surplus, or more likely, this huge shortfall, right? That would be terrible. So we're looking at this variance analysis to be an examination. It's really this health checkup for us. And again, it's a really useful, quick, easy tool. There's a lot more complicated ratio type analysis that we could do. As a matter of fact, if you pull out a financial management textbook, there's about 10 different analyses that you can do on that. But you're really going to need to get into the math to go that far. This one is something that we can just check, and it will help get you right back to looking for pieces that could help you make improvements to be more effective and efficient as a grant manager, okay? So first of all, a couple things. If your budget is based on realistic expectations, and let's hope so, right? Now, if you're the one doing it for the very first time, if you've gone through all those categories that we've looked at and you've come up with the best possible budget, right, you should be pretty close to expectations. And this is barring anything major that's coming up at you. Like, we cannot foresee the future. If we learned anything in the last 6 months, we don't know what's coming, okay? So there's always going to be some sort of variation to that is out of our control. But here's the thing, a lot of the things can be controlled by the manager of the grant, okay? So variance analysis really helps provide us with this useful information. It doesn't give us all the answers, but it's a really good start. It helps us ask the right questions in the future, okay? So this analysis is really essential in your manager in control, right? Because if you take actions in response to this, they often have the potential to dramatically improve the operations and financial performance of your organization, right? Because as I mentioned, a lot of these things can be controlled. So the primary focus of this, now, when you do a variance analysis, this is not the blame game, okay? We're not going to do a variance analysis at the end of every quarter, or you could do it at the end of every month, to look to point fingers at, oh my goodness, you guys are spending too much in this piece and this piece. This is the part that you're using to be useful and used, right? You want to see where the problems are and go find out, but it's not a finger pointing kind of thing, right? This is actually to uncover the cause of operational problems so the problems can be corrected quickly and possibly avoided completely in the future, at the very least, to be minimized as we move forward, right? So, and as you all know, not every variance can be controlled for by you as the manager. So knowing what they are, though, is essential, because then maybe we can adapt and make some changes to tighten those controllable costs to offset anything that's unfavorable that are coming beyond your managerial control, right? Okay, so a couple things. We're going to look at a couple different examples, and then when we finish, I'm actually going to give you one of your own to look at, right? And hopefully then once you get back, for those of you who already have a working budget, that if you haven't been completing a variance analysis, that you'll be able to look at what we did here today and be able to do it for yourself for your own budget. So that's hopefully going to be a really great tool for you if you haven't been using it. So couple things, let's look at this. This little variance analysis, and I will mention, I said I would tell you about some things at the end on the reference page, but this is one of them. Louis Kopensky is, like I said, the leading healthcare finance guru, and his textbooks are super hard and heavy. They've got lots of information and they cover healthcare in all aspects, so it's not necessarily useful to all of you who are working maybe at health departments, whether it be state, county, federal, local, but there are he has some really good tools. So the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation asked him to put together these tutorials. So on this website here, this publichealthfinance.org, he actually has 6, it's called a boot camp, okay? It's actually the finance boot camp. And again, while his textbook is really thick and heavy, this particular modules are very simple to read through, and it's a really good reference point. So these examples that were taken actually come from that. They're part of, I think this is the third module, but there are 6. They run about 15 to 20 pages a piece, and they cover different topics of finance for budgeting, and those are more actually geared towards local health department and grant management. So for those of you who are looking for a little bit more information and maybe how to go to the next steps on some of these things, that will get you there, and then again you could go even forward. I know some of you that are here today actually are part of the MPH or the CPH programs at the University of Montana, and we will be offering a budget course this fall. I will be teaching the budget course this fall. We will be getting more and more into that math. So if that part excites you and you wish to know some more stuff, go ahead and join that. You can grab that class. I did check yesterday and it's not full yet. So we do have some room if that would be of interest to you to keep moving forward. And again, this tutorial is actually really nice, especially if you're relatively new to it, because it's got the 6 modules and they break down to about 15, 20 pages a piece. Now, a couple things about his modules though. They are sort of basic and they're to do that so it's not scaring you away to start with, right? So his first example here talks about this dental clinic. And if you look, this is the first quarter expenses versus the annual, okay? So that makes sense. All right, so we finished the first quarter, and this is the budget. So this isn't the actual expenses. This is what was budgeted for the quarter. What I hope you can see right away is this. His annual budget listed, let's say for the director, okay, is $53,334. If we divide that by 4, right, we would get $13,334. Makes sense. So that's our budget for first quarter. Now, that's all well and good. That means every quarter's budget is $13,334. But think about it. For those of you who are working in health departments and programs and projects, do you spend the same amount of money every quarter for every service that you have? Not necessarily. Now, your compensation for the director may be, because that may be, here's the annual divided by 4. But think about this. Does your budget, if you had a line for clinical supplies, notice here they have $10,000 every quarter. Okay, if you're giving out immunizations, do you have the same amount of immunizations every month, every quarter? No, you're gonna be heavier during that flu season time, right? It's gonna be heavier at that point. So here's what happens. If you just take that annual budget and divide by 4, because either that's the way you were taught or because you've never done it before and that seems the most reasonable, which again, at first glance, divide by 4, that's how we get this. But the problem with that becomes this. You're gonna be way over budget on those months that you're gonna give those immunizations because you're gonna need clinical supplies. You may need extra staff for those months. But then, so it's gonna show that you're off. And then later in April, what's gonna happen? You're actually gonna not use that much and it's gonna look like you have a surplus there when you really don't. It's because you divided your budget just by 4. So think about this. If you have your budget divided in 4 quarters, just based on what the annual is divided by 4, take a look at it when you get back. Is part of the reason that you're seeing, like having to really stress yourself out on keeping track is because you have to say, oh, well, we spent more this month because we had this. Is there a way for you to take some of those things and say, wait, the budget for first quarter should be this. Now again, while the director compensation may need to be that $13,000 for all 4, because it's the same, maybe clinical supplies is $15,000 in first quarter and only $8,000. Again, we're not talking about increasing the budget. We're talking about how do we divide that between quarters so that when we do a variance analysis, we're getting realistic results and not trying to say in our heads, oh, it's because we actually had to give all these immunizations, so that's why we're over. We're going to be fine in March when we give less. That's just too much stress for you. It's too much stress to try to compensate and try to justify why that is. If we have it in the budget to begin with, we're not going to make that mistake. Okay, so again, this is for an example. So they have clearly divided by 4, and that's what we're going to go with today. But for you personally, when you get back, are there pieces in your budget that you could change what that quarterly looks like so that you can keep track a little more effectively and efficiently? Okay. All right, so relatively simple, divided by 4, that's what he has. All right, so here's what we need to do though. To conduct a variance analysis, we're going to have to see, we know what we should have had in the budget. Now the question is, what do we have? Okay, so here we are. We just moved into, we have the same numbers. Here's that budget. Here's what was actually supposed to be given for every quarter. Here are our quarter 1 results. All right, and we can look really quickly and see that these do not match up perfectly. Right? Oh look, 13,000, it was 12. 7,000, it was 8. 25,000, it was 27. We're off in every one of these categories. I don't know, have any of you ever done this and looked to see what your actual was versus initial? I'm guessing you have, and you probably have had them be not perfect, right? Well, why is that? Well, for lots of reasons, but we have to figure it out, right? We want to determine what this actually is because we want to make sure that our actual results are going to eventually line up, right? Our budget only lasts, it lasts for the whole year. We've got to figure out how to make this work. So how do we tell the difference, right? So here's our little formula for variance. Now, you can do this one of 2 ways, but I do it this way. On this one, you're going to see that when you get to your workshop that your little Excel sheet that's opposite of this, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. You can do it either way. This takes the initial budget minus the actual results, okay? Minus the actual results. So we just take this column of 13,334 and we subtract what we actually spent on the director's compensation in the first quarter. Notice here, we're up $478 or $479, right? So we do that with each line item, right? We take the difference because that's, again, it's a variance. We're analyzing what is the difference between what we thought we would spend versus what we spent. But by the time we get to the second one, right? Anytime we see those parentheses, that's a negative, right? We're in the hole here. If we look, we're in the hole here, $1,573. So we continue to do that all the way down, all right? And that gives us those dollars. Now this next column is percentage. Now this is really important to us because while the dollar amount matters, okay, that's just really the first step. Because the truth is, there's bigger variations in some of these than others, okay? And we do that by creating this percentage. And so this 3.6%, how do you get to that number, right? Well, you get to this number of percentage, right? You might want to make a note because you're about to do this by yourself. Okay, 3.6%. You're going to take this $479 difference and you're going to divide it by your initial budget, what it should have been. Okay, so how much variance do you have because you were $479 ahead? Well, you have 3.6%. That's how much variance you have, 3.6%. So quickly, let's think about this. Now that we have, and you calculate each one, again, this would be the same thing. So you would take 1573 divided by 7,041, right? And that gives us this. So as we're looking through here, so notice the numbers, okay, this one's got 1,500, this one's 1,400, that's 1,000. Those are all about the same. But are they? Not really. Because look, if we look over here at the percentages, right? Which one is actually putting us further in the hole? Like, it is bad for itself, right? Again, they're all still relatively around $1,000 to $1,500 that we're down as far as the overall budget. But if we want to make a change, right? This 22.3 percentage point difference, right? Because look, while the assistance compensation, yeah, we're still off $1,400, but we were already planning on paying them almost 26. So it's a small percentage that we're off there, right? But with the hygienist, we were only going to pay them $7,000. How are we in the world? Are we off 22.3%? Right? There's a problem here. So that's what that identifies for us. Okay, wait. Now we see this. Now what are we going to do about it? Right? What are we going to do about it? All right. So we've calculated this difference. We've looked at it this way. So what we do, we hope, is to go to the next piece of it. Again, today you won't have to go this far. You just have to do the first part, right? But we're hoping that the goal is for you to take this home, right, to your budgets if you're not using variance analysis already and be able to do that. And if you find there's problem areas, go this next step, okay? So if we look, here is his exhibit 5, right? This is what he's done. So we noticed that hygienist compensation, so I'm gonna pull this back up just one more time. So the hygienist compensation is supposed to be $7,041, right? Instead, it was $8,614. All right, so a couple things about this particular example before we go to the broken down part. All right, it's showing us right now that it's $1,573 higher than what we budgeted. And when the compensation is broken down into hours worked, an average per hour, we actually see that we're okay on the hours. Look, we budgeted 576 hours. We only used 545 hours. Now, how in the world can that be the case, right? What's the problem? We should be up money, right? Because we thought we were getting 576 hours. Now, a couple things about this clinic. We pay some hygienists, and some of them are in-kind contributors, okay? So we have some that are volunteering their time and others that are paid. So what we did was we thought, okay, 576 hours worth is what we're gonna have to pay for. Everybody else is gonna be in kind, all right? So no problem. And again, we look and we think, we're under hours, but look at that average pay per hour, right? We thought we were gonna pay them how much? $12.24. We actually paid them $15.81. What? Okay, that's that fair market value. Maybe we didn't understand, right? Maybe prices have changed, things have changed. Maybe we created this 3 years ago and we just weren't working to think about it. So at first glance, it looks like number of hours wise, we're actually good. We're up. We had a positive variance of 31. This means that hygienists actually worked 31 hours less than what we thought. But because we have this pay compensation problem, right? That means they were paid on average $3.59 more than what we assumed. That's a big difference, right? That's a big variance. It's not, we thought we were gonna pay them $12.22 and we paid them $12.30. We thought we were gonna pay them $12.22 and we end up having to pay them $15.81. Okay, so once we do that, once we break it down into hours and rate, now you have that additional information for analyzing your budget results, right? Now we know that the failure to meet the budget wasn't a result of more, because your automatic assumption is, oh my gosh, we must have had more hours, but that's not actually what happened, right? So ensure, now this is the end of our first quarter. So what are we gonna have to do? Are we gonna be able to pay them less? Probably not. That must be the fair market value for what's happening. We just did not either know that or didn't make adjustments like we were supposed to. So we're gonna be in trouble here because we probably can't change the rate of what they're getting paid, right? So to ensure that this doesn't change throughout the year, here's what we want to do. We need to start to look maybe at a review of the hygienist work assignments. Maybe we could place more of the workload on volunteers, right? Maybe we could bump that up, because now what we need to do is see the difference, right? How much is it going to take us to hit that 576 hours? Because if that's what we thought we needed that many hours, how are we going to make up the difference, and what's the pay going to look like on that, right? So if not, then we're going to have to consider other alternatives, right? And other alternatives might be that we have to reallocate resources from something else, right? Or, you know, worst case scenario, what's going to happen? Maybe we can't provide as many cleanings as we thought, as many clinics, right? As we might have to cut down on services. Or maybe we have a reserve, or maybe, like I said, maybe we can ask for more in-kind donations and we can get to that. But we definitely don't want to have to reduce the number of cleanings, right? And then we'd of course have to reduce the number of hygienist hours to do that, right? But this at least tells us, and again, back to the original, this comes from being able to take that just first quick glance, right? And for all of you who have a budget, right, for your quarter one, quarter two, right? Can you look at that and then go based off what you should have been to what you actually have and figure the variance and see where you have problems? Where are you up? Where are you down? Because you still have time. You have time to make changes throughout the course of the rest of the year. You are not beholden to wait till the end of the year to see that you've got this huge, can you imagine how much they would be down, right? It's 1573. If they kept on track with this, she's gonna be down, what, $7,000 by the end of the year in that category. Now again, she might be up some, but maybe not, right? And why is this the case? And you don't even have to look at a variance analysis to go to the next thing to see the bad stuff, right? It's just as important to go see, why is this that we're up office staff compensation? Again, that for this particular budget, it may in fact be because they broke down just divide by 4. So hopefully if you're doing it differently, you would know. But again, utilities, that's gonna fluctuate, right? So should you have that much budgeted for every quarter, or do you need to have more budgeted for the winter or the summertime, and vice versa, okay? All right, so what we wanna do now is go to our breakout rooms. And you should have an Excel spreadsheet that actually lists, gives you that. It's called Your Turn Variance Analysis. Be careful when you complete this. I put it in Excel so that you can actually use Excel instead of having to get your little calculators out and do that, because anytime, that's a nice little note, right? Anytime you can use Excel or something where you're not doing the numbers by hand, always good. Always use your cell references to create your formulas if you can do so, because it's a whole lot easier, and humans make mistakes. And when you're dealing with numbers, the last thing you want to do is make a mistake, because trust me, you have to go through something, and this little budget that you have here is easy, but yours is probably a lot more detailed, a lot longer. Can you imagine having to go back and redo all those things by hand? No, we never want to do that, okay? So notice that, like I said, in the example one, he has the initial budget here, and then the actual results. I have it the opposite way on your chart, so I'm not trying to trick you. It's just the way I put it in there. So go ahead and figure out the variance and the percentage, and then we'll talk about, you can talk about it in your group, do it together, make sure everybody gets a chance to do it, and then we'll talk about it as a whole.
Yeah, so you'll be automatically put into given room assignments again. If a few people don't end up, I'll try to even out the rooms once everyone's in. Make sure there isn't a room with just one person.
Hey, there were like 6 people in the breakout room I went into.
I saw that. Yeah, I just moved another person too, so hopefully now we should be good. About 3 in each.
I need a walk break. I usually take one in the morning.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, I have another meeting at 3, so then it means I have a chunk of
Same.
free time, and then I'll do 2 meetings.
So that'll be good. Because I kind of want to get outside for a minute after this and just kind of be in the sun.
Same here.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Howdy, howdy.
I have returned.
When you're officially done, Trish, just throw it back to me real quick. I'll thank them and then point them toward the link to the eval, which will be in the chat, and then also tell them that they'll get an email.
Okay. I'm going to do this variance analysis real quick. Oops.
Do you have plans for the rest of your day, Tricia?
Probably sit down.
Yeah, fair. Sounds like an excellent idea.
Oh, no, I'm going to have to feed my almost 17-year-old and then
That's going to take a lot of food.
yeah, and then figure out what I'm doing for the rest of the day. It was funny because it's interesting. I woke him up during our last break. So that's why I said I could do this morning thing, because he's had AP exams and stuff and they're in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, I got to do morning because he's got to be on his stuff and logged in and timing wise. So like,
yeah,
it's crazy to try to make sure everybody's in the right spots.
Yeah, seriously. How was getting up early?
Oh, that's fine. I get up early anyway. It was just a matter of like, okay, I probably should eat something before I jump on type thing. And I'm not used to,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Plus, I thought I probably shouldn't wear sweats, so, got dressed. I mean, I know you can only see from here up, but still, you feel better like when you're actually doing this to.
Yes, exactly. I know. I'm like, I'm at least in like jeans, I'm like,
Right.
I'm not in my pajama pants.
Right. So, and I don't mind, like, again, if I'm working or doing whatever, if we've got something, but I just, it's easier.
For sure.
And you just feel like you're actually doing something you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right.
It feels professional.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
besides, I haven't put on something that's actually real like this for quite a while.
Hey, there we go. Well, we're glad to give you a reason.
Me too. If it fit a little better, that'd be better, but that's the way it works, I guess, right?
All right, we've got a few folks trickling back in. How much longer do you want the other groups to have?
Maybe give them just another minute or so. I assume they're probably done.
Okay, I'll go to
Again.
close the rooms, give them that countdown.
The Excel sheet is not hard if you've used Excel at all.
Cool. All right.
That's why
Well,
that was the point, right? Give it to them so they go, oh, this is not hard.
exactly. Yeah, this is all like doable.
It was really funny though, because when I first pulled this up, I actually did the math by hand, and I was like, what are you doing? What? Just make an Excel sheet. Well, because I was going to make a copy for them to put in their handout. That's why it's not, when you said to me it's not in the handout,
Yeah.
because it was in the handout, and I pulled it out and then I created this later, and I forgot to throw this in
God,
that folder.
That's why I was like, I think they need this, but I don't know.
Yeah,
It could be a
they do.
surprise.
Because like I said, I just did it by hand. I was like, what are you doing? Honey? You have Excel. Well, I guess I was just thinking it wasn't that long. So,
Yeah.
but who wants to do that by hand?
Yeah, seriously, when you've got Excel to use. Okay.
What did I get?
Everyone, they're all coming back. Woo.
Okay.
Y'all got done.
I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. So what I'm basically going to do here, and to give everybody a shot, like I said, I assume most of you use Excel, and for the most part what you're doing here. I'm just going to go ahead and share. Now I'm going to move this. Emily, if it doesn't show up, tell me, and I'll have to reshare the screen, because sometimes it gives me a sense about it and I can't tell. Can you see the variance analysis or not?
Nope.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I need to go back to here. It makes me reshare it is what happens. So that's why I was asking, even though it's on the same screen the other one is. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's just double check to make sure that everybody's looking got the same thing. And again, you may have done this backwards. Oops, didn't like it there. Right? So what we're looking at here, again, I did like the example did. Now I set it up for you to go the opposite way, right? So you could have done it that way, or you can do it the other way. So either way, the number's gonna be the same. It's just gonna be a plus or a minus, right? So you just have to, whatever you're most comfortable with, don't confuse yourself is the key here, right? So we wanna make sure that you actually understand the variance. So when I just did this a second ago, I went ahead and did it like we did in the example. I took the budget minus what we actually spent, right? Budget versus actually what we spent. So notice here that gives me a negative number when I get it, right? So I know automatically that that's a negative. Same thing here once I change it to a percentage. Remember that this variance is this dollar amount divided by what we actually budgeted. And then of course you times by 100 to give us that percentage. So right here, again, when it's a negative, that gives us that, instead of the parentheses, it's giving us a negative. And it depends, if you've used Excel a lot, you have it where it's already set up to just make your little parentheses, but this just gives us a basic. If not, we can see anything that's negative. So just by looking at this, right, percentage wise, where are we off the most? Anybody want to tell us? How about payroll taxes, right? Uh-oh, right? So somebody remembered the fringe but forgot the payroll tax, right? Or didn't realize there was going to be as much of it there, right? So because we see that we're 4% in that hole here, that's a big difference for that piece of it. Now again, looking at the overall variance, where are we the most in the hole? Well, the most in the whole total is the personnel cost, right? Which is typical for us, right? And where's the variance, right? So we're up, we're down in salary, but we're up in fringe, we're over. Oh, look what happened. Somebody didn't take into account the fringe either, right? And this, so think about that. Actually, we're under, sorry, we're under is opposite here. We're under on the fringe, but we're over on the payroll, right? So when we look at these kind of things, like where is those discrepancies? And again, the percentage helps us because we still want to know the overall numbers, right? We don't want to be losing $7,000 at a time in any one place. But we also have to look to see how much that is in the budget. And notice, like for salary overall, right, $7,839 in this $1.6 million budget, right? So we want not only the numbers, because that's important, because that's going to mess up our overall budget, but also this percentages that we can identify that. So what we'd want to do is go through here and see how come we're up on supplies, how come we're down in payroll taxes, right? And that would be that next step that he then does, where he looks to see those hours, right, of the hygienist versus how much we're actually paying, especially if the payroll taxes. We need to have a little chit chat with that payroll department, whoever's doing that, and figure out how come we're off so much, right? I mean, did they get higher? Was there something passed that we didn't have in our initial budget? And that can happen, right? Like think about that. What if something was increased and we didn't have that in our budget? So clearly that's going to be wrong, but we need to make an adjustment because we can't afford to do that for the rest of the year, right? So that's really our overarching goal. So hopefully you can use that little variance analysis tool moving forward. And again, I think that's it's one of my favorites here. Let's see if I go like this. Did it go back to the screen or no? Is it still?
Yep, no, it looks good, sorry.
Okay, is it on the Excel sheet or back to my regular?
Regular.
Okay, good. All right, so here we are. We've found ourselves to the way of the world. Let's look here. Dun, 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 dun. Did we learn anything today? I do hope we did. I at least hope we got a good review, all right? For a lot of you, I know it was a review, so I'm glad that you got a few chances to think about things. So let's think about this. Here's the things we were supposed to learn today, right? What should we be able to do? Identify the 3 overarching categories of resources that managers allocate. Who remembers what those 3 things are? Anyone? How about time, money, and things, right? Time, money, and things. All right, what were the 5 reasons for documentation? Now these are good because for those of you who are old enough to know and have seen Saturday Night Live, you'll remember that our best little Adam Sandler used to do that little skit called The Cajun Man, and everything rhymed and ended in a shun. So almost all 5 of these, except for the very first one, ends in that shun, so we can remember why do we need to document, right? So the first one is just manage effectively, which we hope that's always our goal as we start. But the rest of them are shuns. Why do we document? For evaluation, right? For dissemination, for replication, and for evaluation, right? So that's the reason. So we can sort of keep that in our head. And if you haven't seen Cajun Man, you should catch that because it's funny. All right, so the 3 categories of project documentation, did we cover that? Do we know what we're trying to document here? Yes, we have those financial transactions, right? We have occurrences and we have events or processes, right? We have occurrences and events and we have processes or components. And remember, those occurrences and events are things that just happen hardly ever, like the gala or the thing, but processes and components are a lot of that. And then of course the financial transactions are going to take up a huge part of our time when we're documenting, right? We looked at the difference between in-kind contributions, and not to get hooked up on that, what does it mean? Remember, cash is cash. We want to make sure in-kind can be almost anything, right? But remember, it's a contribution. Anything that's cash is a donation. Otherwise, we should be good on those in-kind contributions. Direct versus indirect costs. Remember, indirect is that sort of fishy thing that we probably call overhead. And on the opposite side of that, direct falls into those 9 categories. And when we see it, think about how we had to actually classify those and how some of them were relatively easy and others were a little bit more difficult. Remember, the grant budget is not the total project budget. It will cost you, in fact, for those of you who are new to this game, it will be more than what your grant says, okay? So start to see where you're gonna need that. Look at those 5 components and see where you can make some changes, and are you gonna need to get some additional funding or some additional in-kind contribution? What are you gonna have to do to make up the difference between what the grant budget is and what you actually are going to have to be responsible for? And finally, calculated a simple variance analysis. See, I didn't even lie, math at the end, and it was relatively simple, right? Why? Because I'm following the financial maxims of being honest and being prudent and being here. So it was fun. So hopefully this has been at least a little bit for you. Here's those references. Again, the first one here is those that financial tutorial services. There are six modules. If you go to the This one will take you straight to that tutorial. That's the one I grabbed this off of. But if you actually just go to publichealthfinance.org, there at the very top there, it says boot camp, and it's free. So it's boot camp. There are 6 modules. Like I said, he is the be all end all about that. Let's see, budget, health, and finance basics. This book. So the one I used for the most part was this grant winners toolkit. A lot of your pieces came from that, and it's that project management and evaluation. But they also had another book out that was written a year later, and this is the grant seekers toolkit. Now that seems like you're still, you're going after your grant, but lots of pieces in this actually go with if you already have a grant. Now, what's really good about this one is if you happen to have access to the University of Montana's Mansfield Library, it's free because it's an online text. Now, even if you don't have that, so for some of you who said, okay, the variance analysis, that was nice, it was simple, it was easy, but I need to do a few more things, or I don't know how to really get to my direct cost, like how much are each of those little pieces going to cost? So in this one, especially if you're going to create your next budget to make sure you've covered the pieces, they actually offer these spreadsheets. Because this book is older and it came like with a disc originally, they have put those spreadsheets on this website at Wiley, and you can download them. So it actually has a lot of different, there's probably 20 different Excel spreadsheets that can help you start to like calculate all this and how you go and put all the pieces together, especially if you're coming up with a budget that you want to do the budget narrative for. So that's actually really useful information. Again, this is that series of 6 tutorials. And then that book that I was using, that budget justification came from here, and your mystery budget came from the bottom. So hopefully that's some really good resources as far as that goes, and that will put you on the right track in the future. And remember, if you haven't signed up, you're an MPH or CPH student for the budget class in the fall, I'll be waiting. So I'm going to throw this back over to Emily. Otherwise, I've appreciated being here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I have a link that I'm going to put in the chat box to an evaluation form. I will be emailing that out as well later, along with certificates of completion. But if you can fill out the evaluation, it's pretty quick and it's really useful. We appreciate it. We will have this recording as well available in the future too, so you can review it that way. And if you have any questions, again, certainly get a hold of us. Visit the website for more content coming up. And thank you very much for attending. Yay!
Thank you. Thanks, Trish.
Thanks.